Chapter 16, 4 Years We all have to grow up, get out from under our parents' wings and fly free in the sky. It will be a painful, lonely, and maturing journey, but in the end you will look back and thank your parents for allowing you to fly despite the worries that every mother and father will feel when they see their child go. Aenar Targaryen, seeing Eddard Stark's eyes full of worry. 293 AD 10th year of the reign of King Robert I Baratheon of House Baratheon. North Winterfell, ancestral home of House Stark. Clang. 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 The sound of clashing swords echoed in the training grounds of Winterfell Castle. In the center of the arena, two teenagers were fighting with real swords. Both exchanged blows with force and speed. Sparks exploded with each collision of the blunt blades of the swords. Blow after blow, collision after collision. Robb felt his arms heavy and aching as his blue eyes were fixed on his half-brother's face. He hated fighting Jon. It was as if his brother was anticipating his every move. And it was so incredibly frustrating that he didn't like fighting Jon. Suddenly, Robb felt the sword loosen in his hand with the collision of the swords, and before he could react, a cold object was pressed against his throat. "I surrender." Robb let out a sigh and gave up without a second thought. Honestly, in the first fight between him and Jon, Robb had felt envious and jealous of Jon's abilities, but his father's words made that feeling disappear completely. Everyone has strengths and weaknesses. As his father had said, Jon, although extremely talented with the art of the sword, was incredibly bad at training the jousting, to the point of never winning against him even once. This made his confidence soar to heights never seen before. "When it's jousting, I'm going to make you eat mud," Robb said, looking at the 10-year-old. "You can only beat me in the justa, Robb." Jon replied with a sarcastic tone, making Robb laugh. "Still, I can beat you," the red-haired boy retorted with a confident face. They both looked at each other and smiled, finding the moment funny. Suddenly, the boys heard footsteps approaching, and when they turned to see who was coming, they saw a young man of 15 wearing brown clothes with a coat of arms of a golden kraken embroidered on his chest. "Theon." Robb greeted the heir to the Iron Islands in a friendly manner, although he didn't particularly like the young man for his arrogant and lustful attitude. "You're fighting the bastard again?" Theon said, looking at Jon with a condescending look and a sarcastic smile on his lips. Robb frowned briefly when he heard the insulting words of his father's pupil, but relaxed them in the next second. In his father's words, you should never show your emotions in front of people, they might use them against you. That's exactly what he was doing at the moment, and Jon didn't need anyone to defend him. As Robb expected, Jon spoke in the most sarcastic voice he could muster at the moment. "Better to be a bastard than the son of a traitor and rapist, you filthy squid." His voice made the heir of Pike's face livid with rage. "How dare you insult my noble house, bastard?" Theon practically growled with fury, and as he drew his sword, he felt a heavy blow on his legs, knocking him off balance and onto the ground with a thud. He opened his eyes, which had been closed in the fall, and when he looked up, he saw a pair of purple eyes staring coldly at him. He could feel the cold of the blade touching his throat. "Watch your words, Theon Greyjoy. I don't like being humiliated, least of all by the son of a man like your father, Balon Greyjoy." Jon spoke, looking at the heir to the Iron Islands with a cold, penetrating gaze. To show that he meant business, he pressed the blunt blade hard into the 15-year-old's neck. Jon leaned down and looked directly into the young man's eyes, continuing to speak. "Remember that you may think you're Eddard Stark's ward, but you're a hostage so that your traitorous father doesn't betray the crown yet again. And thank your rapist god the king put you under Eddard Stark's tutelage, because any other lord would have killed you in a mysterious accident." Anger, fear, and resentment could be seen in the eyes of the heir of Pike, but he lowered his head and dared not look again at the bastard who had humiliated him. Seeing the look on his face, Jon remained indifferent and stepped back, taking the blade from his neck. "You could be kinder, he probably hates you right now." Robb, standing next to Jon, commented in a calm tone. "It's not wise to have the future heir to the Iron Islands as an enemy, especially given his status." Jon's lips lifted in a particularly handsome smile. "If he has the courage, he can come and meet me on the battlefield. I'll behead his head and give it to Balon, so he can complete his collection of dead sons." "Sometimes you're very sadistic, brother." Robb rolled his eyes at his half-brother's sadistic comments. "Sometimes you're too kind and compassionate, Robb. The lords of the north aren't kind and I'm not compassionate." Jon returned his words with a smile, although his gaze showed a playful expression. Robb let out a groan of frustration at hearing such words. He knew more than anyone that Jon's words were the purest truth. The northern lords didn't care about politeness or kindness, only force could make those extremely stubborn men bend the knee. The heir of Winterfell sensed that he would have many more headaches in the future. As if remembering something, Robb turned to look at Jon and spoke with a tired tone from his training. Our father asked you to go to his solar when the training was over. I'm going to take a bath and rest for a while. Rest well, after all, you were beaten like a helpless woman. Just as Robb was about to enter the castle, he heard Jon's amused voice behind him. Robb's face turned grim in an instant as he quickened his steps, quickly disappearing from his half-brother's sight. Ignoring Theon getting up from the floor, Jon walked towards the castle after putting away both swords used for training, entering the 8 millennia-old stone castle. As he walked through the halls of Winterfell, Jon couldn't help but recall the events of those 4 years. First there were the births of Eddard Stark's children. The man was very fertile as Catelyn congratulated him with 5 children and the 6th in the line was on the way. Note, I'll make Rickon Stark older than in the canon as I want all 6 children of House Stark. In the year 289 after Aegon's conquest, Arya Stark, the second lady of House Stark, was born. In the year 290 after the conquest, Bran Stark was born, the second lord of House Stark. In the year 292 after the conquest, the 6th son of House Stark, Rickon Stark, was born. Jon loved his uncle's children. Arya and Bran were particularly sweet children who he enjoyed playing with and helping to look after, although the Redfish hadn't liked the situation at all, but with Eddard's help, she stayed silent despite her hatred for him growing every year. Another thing he heard was his reforms taking place across the sea, on the continent of Essos. From the information he had earned from Melina, the Red Priestess who had stayed in Winter Town, he discovered that everything was going smoother than he had planned. The Bible he had written had practically worked miracles when it came to indoctrination and faith, and the Red Church's numbers had practically doubled during those 4 years. This was no small number if you think that the Red Church was the predominant religion in Essos. It was such a large number that Jon felt he had underestimated the importance of the Bible. Another thing that had changed was the Fiery Hand, the Red Times private army, which had expanded from 1,000 men originally to the current 20,000 men and was increasing every day. If Jon hadn't specified to Kinvara that only trained soldiers could be part of the army, that number would have doubled or even tripled in those 4 years. Fortunately, the Red Church was the predominant religion in Essos, so money to support such a large war machine wasn't difficult. According to Melina, there wasn't much internal resistance within the Red Church. The old, stubborn priests who refused to change had been killed and younger, more devout priests had been put in their place. The hierarchy of the Red Church had also changed. The supreme power of the Red Church was named High Reverend Mother, for short, Reverend Mother, and as the name implies, only women could serve as High Reverend Mother. Kinvara became the first High Reverend Mother and the Supreme Pontiff of Essos. Chapter 17, 4 years 2. Lies will always be discovered, especially if there are powers beyond human comprehension. Aenar Targaryen, aged 10, watching Eddard Stark. Eddard watched his nephew enter his solar. At the age of 10, Aenar was already tall and broad-shouldered, easily passing for a young man of 13 or 14. His features bore the innate nobility and beauty of House Targaryen, something often commented on by the servants. Eddard knew that his nephew drew too much attention for his own good. What most caught the Lord of Winterfell's attention, however, was the boy's posture and aura. Before him stood a young man of regal and princely bearing. Every movement, every gesture, every intense gaze exuded the dignity of a prince. There were times when Aenar's presence was so imposing that Eddard almost believed he was standing before a powerful and wise king. Sometimes he found himself dreaming of Aenar sitting on the Iron Throne. And even against his will, he had to admit, he knew that his nephew could be as great a king as Jaehaerys I, the Old King. Perhaps even greater than any monarch who had ever reigned in Westeros. Better than Robert. Shaking his head, Eddard put these dangerous thoughts out of his mind and took a deep breath. Jon would never be king. I see you're sweaty. How was your training? Eddard leaned back in his chair and asked, looking at his nephew with an impassive expression. As always, Robb being defeated. Jon replied in a calm, courteous tone. His crimson-red clothes hugged his body, showing off his slightly muscular and slender frame. Eddard nodded, showing no surprise at his words. In terms of talent with the sword, he saw that his nephew probably equaled or surpassed Arthur Dayne, the legendary Knight of the Dawn, wielding the sword Dawn of House Dayne. A flash of memory made him feel deeply ashamed. The death of the brother of the woman he loved had scarred him deeply. If it hadn't been for Howland Reed's cowardly blow, they would all have died at Sir Arthur Dayne's hands that day. Of that he had no doubt. Each stroke of Arthur's double swords were like fleeting flashes in the air, killing almost instantly any knight or man he knew. Snapping out of old memories, Eddard spoke again. "I heard from the Master at Arms that you wish to leave for a while and travel in the north?" "That's true. I've long wanted to see the wall and perhaps some White Walkers mounted on ice spiders." Jon replied, his words slightly amused by his insinuation. Eddard rolled his eyes, but he didn't refuse to meditate and ponder. He had been young once and knew how tempting it was to travel in search of exciting adventures in the mind of a teenager. Jon would probably run away if he didn't agree, and if asked which option he would prefer, Eddard would reply that he would rather prepare things so that Jon would travel properly prepared, than have the boy run away and be unprepared on a journey towards the wall. "I will order a horse and supplies for your journey to the wall, as well as a raven announcing your arrival to the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Jeor Mormont." Eddard spoke, causing Jon to flash a very happy smile. Seeing that smile, Eddard smiled too. It was rare to see his nephew smile like a real 10-year-old. Sometimes he felt that Jon was carrying an extremely heavy burden, which confused him. Suddenly, he noticed the smile on his lips disappearing, replaced by frowning lips. "Do you think I'm a fool, Lord Stark?" Looking directly into the gray eyes of the Protector of the North, he asked with a calm tone. Jon knew that his performance at this moment would have to be Oscar-worthy to make the Lord Protector of the North's iron heart melt like snow on a day of extreme heat. The question surprised Eddard. He shook his head in denial and replied, "How foolish you can be, Jon. Maester Luwin has praised your wisdom since you were 4. Although Lord Stark treats me like one," Jon said, his voice slightly lower than usual. "What do you mean by that, Jon?" Eddard asked, his tone gradually becoming harsher and more powerful. He felt a bad premonition for some reason, as if what was about to happen would change the whole course of his life. Jon didn't answer and walked over to the jug containing water and, with a little water in his hands, wet a lock of his hair. As the ink-stained drops fell to the floor, the dark tone of the lock of hair soon faded, showing a pale color with a slight golden hue. It was a lock of white gold hair, a rare color even in ancient Valyria. "You repeatedly deny knowing my mother's identity, but you also ask me to dye my hair every day. Am I such a fool not to realize something so obvious, Lord Stark?" Jon asked again, looking directly into the eyes of the Lord Protector of the North. Jon wanted to pressure Eddard into telling his true identity. The reason for this was quite simple. He wanted to make the North start preparing for the future civil war right now. When the Kaelin Moat was rebuilt and used as a war fortress, any army from the south would be stopped from entering the north, just like thousands of years ago. The only danger was House Reed, who knew of passages through the swamps, but knowing the loyalty of the Lord of the Greywater Watch, he wasn't worried about the betrayal of the man who had been helped by his mother, Lyanna Stark. The look on Eddard Stark's face hardened at the question. He clenched his fists and forced himself to calm down. Although he knew he would have this conversation someday, he didn't expect it to be when Jon was only 10. The boy was far too intelligent, which gave him an enormous headache. Eddard didn't know how to hide the truth without increasing the boy's suspicions even more. Jon dash, before Eddard could continue, he was interrupted by Jon. "I know whose son I am." Jon spoke directly. He had to pretend to be hurt by the information he had, showing a veiled expression of sadness, anger, and regret. The fruit of rape, worse than the fate of being a bastard. Eddard's face, though still impassive, was pale. He felt his body was drained of strength by those words that cut through his heart like daggers. Resting his elbows on the table, he pressed his face against his hands and bowed his head. An extremely tense and heavy atmosphere hung in the air. The suffocating feeling in the air could make any timid person piss their pants without any dignity. Raising his head, Eddard looked at his nephew and felt as if a sword had pierced his heart. The expression of pain, anger, and resentment was one he never thought he'd see on his nephew's usually calm, confident, elegant, and courteous face. "Jon." Eddard spoke in a hoarse, slightly shaky voice. "I know you don't have to tell me." Jon interrupted. "I can't stay too long in the north. The longer I live with your family, the more danger they're in. What if the king decides to visit Winterfell and see me? Although I don't know what my father looks like, I can assume that I have many similarities with him. Jon's words made Eddard unable to say anything else. Jon's words reminded him of something. He was Lord Paramount of the North and Lord of Winterfell. He had to defend his fief and look after the continuation of House Stark above all else. He knew Jon was right. If Robert discovered his nephew's true identity, he had no doubt that the king would summon all his banners and march north to eliminate the threat to his throne. Not only would the North be in danger, but also his entire family. The image of his beheaded children and wife appeared in the Lord of the North's mind. Unconsciously, he clenched his fists, vowing that he would never let such a thing happen. Even though he didn't want to, Eddard decided to start preparing to prevent something like this from happening. Even though he didn't want war, he wasn't afraid of it. He would protect the North and his family just like the old kings of winter. Just as his father would and as his brother would. The Moat Cailin. Eddard soon thought of the most important fortress in the north, where the armies of the south had been prevented from entering the north for thousands of years without success. Although expensive and time-consuming, Eddard estimated that much of the castle could be restored for the defense of the north. In addition, the fortress could be given to his second son as a fief. Robb would inherit Winterfell after him, but Bran would have to leave and create his own noble house and serve as Robb's vassals. He could very well give the Cailin Moat to Bran to rule. That way he wouldn't have to worry about betrayal or any other house having power beyond House Stark in the north. Without realizing it, Eddard found himself thinking of various measures to prevent an invasion from the south if Jon's identity was revealed. The Lord of Winterfell was manipulated in such a subtle way that he would probably never discover that he had been successfully manipulated. Don't blame me, uncle, only this way can you live longer. Jon thought, seeing the determined expression on Eddard Stark's face. Although it was cruel to manipulate the man who raised him like a true son, it was for his own good and also for his own benefit. The North would be his base for the reconquest of Westeros. Chapter 18, 4 Years 3. How would you like to be recognized? For your beauty? Wealth? For the number of women you've conquered throughout your life? Others may complain that such achievements are useless and futile, but you've managed to leave your legacy in the world and they haven't. Which is something to celebrate. Aenar Targaryen. Should war come to our home, we will fight together, uncle, Jon said, his voice terribly serious and determined, causing Eddard to display an expression of surprise and emotion. It was the first time Jon had called him anything other than Lord Stark. He had called him uncle. You can go back to your room, Jon. You must be tired, Eddard said, noting the exhausted expression on his nephew's face. He also noticed the slightly red eyes, as if the boy was going to cry at any moment. Jon nodded and left Lord Stark's solar. As soon as he closed the door, his expression returned to normal. He wiped away the tears he had forced himself to shed and walked calmly away. The first part of the plan was ready. Now it was just a matter of making his uncle increasingly wary of the king and finally demonstrating his sense of revenge towards the king. He would reveal his plan to take the throne and avenge his good mother, Elia Martell, and her brothers and sisters. Eddard could not deny a son's right to avenge his house. It would inevitably bring the North into the war and, with the existence of Caraxes to prove his legitimacy, Jon was sure that many other noble houses were ready to rebel. The plan was going according to what Jon wanted. He just had to follow what he planned to sit on the Iron Throne before the Night King with his army of hundreds of thousands of undead got anywhere near the wall. As Jon was thinking about the countless possibilities he had seen in the future, he felt a pair of eyes fall on him and he glanced at a dark-haired girl looking at him with big dark brown eyes. Jon. Seeing that she had been caught red-handed, the girl came out from behind a pillar she was hiding behind and exclaimed loudly, running towards him. Taking the girl in his arms, Jon kissed her cheek and asked in an affectionate tone, "Shouldn't you be taking sewing lessons from Septa, Arya?" 4-year-old Arya Stark. The girl's face showed a frown, her eyes filled with disdain at the mention of the septa. "I hate sewing, it hurts so much when I pierce myself with the needle." She spoke in a low tone, dissatisfied at being forced to do something she didn't want to. "But that's something every lady should study." Jon smiled and teased the girl. "I'm not a lady," exclaimed the 4-year-old as she glared fiercely at Jon, or at least that's what she thought she was doing. In Jon's eyes, Arya's expression was nothing but pure cuteness. Giving her another kiss on the cheek, calming her down, Jon said, pretending to apologize, "I beg your pardon for my insolence, great Arya Stark, the second coming of Nymeria." The girl's expression changed from anger to condescension and smugness. "You're forgiven, I'll let you carry me to my room, be honored." Jon almost couldn't suppress the laugh he was about to let out after hearing her words. His younger cousin really was someone nice to talk to. With Arya in his arms, Jon walked towards her room. However, he soon noticed the slightly sad expression on the girl's face. "What happened? You look sad," he asked, his tone gentle and concerned. "Sansa called me Horseface," Arya replied, leaning her head on Jon's shoulder. Her voice carried a desolate sadness. She had wanted to be beautiful like Sansa, with the straight red hair of her sister and mother. But she had inherited her father's dark brown hair and gray eyes. "I think you're much prettier than Sansa," said Jon, kissing her forehead tenderly. He didn't want Arya to grow up with low self-esteem, something he himself had faced in another life. He knew how destructive it could be, leading to depression and other deep difficulties, even suicide. Hearing something like that from someone Arya thought was as handsome as Jon seemed like medicine for her 4-year-old heart. "Really?" she asked, her eyes shining with a spark of hope. For Arya, if Jon thought she was beautiful, then it could only be true. "Yes," Jon replied with conviction and a gentle smile on his lips. "You'll be as beautiful as Nymeria or Visenya, full of bravery, courage and the determination to keep going, no matter what the challenges." He spared no compliments. "In the future, everyone will know the name of Arya Stark, the Night of Wolves. But no one will remember Sansa Stark." Despite the favoritism evident in his words, Jon believed in what he was saying. He already envisioned a great future for Arya, one where she would leave her mark on Westeros. What's more, the girl looked incredibly like Lyanna Stark, his mother, in her youth. How could someone like that be ugly? Jon's words seemed to ignite a flame of enthusiasm in Arya, whose gray eyes shone like living torches. Jon had the impression that the girl would have trouble sleeping that night, so excited was she. When he reached the bedroom door, he placed her carefully on the floor and stroked her dark brown hair. "I'm leaving for the Wall later today. I'll probably be away for a few months. Until then, I want you to behave and not run away from the castle again."
Look, if you've actually made it this far into the video and you're still here, come on then, hit subscribe. And honestly, if you think a friend of yours would like this, go on and share it with them. It really helps out. Right, I'm done. I'll get out of your hair now so you can get back to the good stuff. But seriously, stick around till the end. It's well worth it.
Even at just 4 years old, Arya was already adventurous to the extreme, causing trouble and mischief like a typhoon. All it took was one opportunity for her to deftly escape from the castle. Fortunately, she had never crossed Winterfell's boundaries, and everyone knew the Lord of the North's second daughter, which avoided any major problems that could have arisen. Even so, her escapades led to great confusion, and both Eddard and Catelyn often got headaches from Arya's antics. They both tried to educate the girl, but ended up failing, with her resisting the lessons even more fiercely. Suddenly, Arya turned her head so quickly that Jon was surprised her neck hadn't been hurt. "Can I come with you, Jon? Please, please, please." She clung to his leg, looking up with pleading, hopeful eyes. On hearing that Jon was going to the Wall, Arya decided she wanted to accompany him. She had heard of the place all her short life and didn't want to miss the chance to go on an epic adventure with her favorite brother. "No," replied Jon, rolling his eyes. His refusal was as firm as it was cruel. He couldn't take a 4-year-old girl to a place full of rapists and thieves, even if there were many good men in the Night's Watch. Besides, his trip had a specific purpose: to visit one of the 3 remaining Targaryen relatives on the continent. It was not a suitable journey for Arya. The hope in Arya's eyes was extinguished almost immediately by Jon's words. She heard the determination in his voice. It seemed that no matter what she said, he would refuse without a second thought. Seeing the dejected look on the girl's face, Jon's hard heart softened and he crouched down to the same height as her, looking directly at the girl. "Although I can't take you, I can bring you some gifts if you've behaved well. Maybe I'll even ask a blacksmith to build you a sword worthy of a warrior queen like Visenya and Nymeria." He smiled. The despondency and sadness on her face disappeared as quickly as you might expect from a child her age. Hugging Jon, Arya exclaimed in an excited tone, "I'll behave." At the thought of having a sword, the girl's lovely cheeks turned a pale shade of red. At that moment, in her mind, she was only seeing her riding on an indomitable horse and holding a sword worthy of being comparable to Blackfire or the Dark Sister. Now go and rest. Patting her on the back a few times, Jon stood up and spoke in a serious tone, to which Arya nodded repeatedly. She looked at Jon once more and flashed a big, excited smile as she ran into her room, jumping for joy. Seeing the scene, Jon felt a great sense of satisfaction. He knew he would be a good father, or at least try his best to be. Much better than his father in his past life, who had cowardly abandoned him with the excuse that he couldn't bear to see him slowly dying in a hospital bed. Taking a deep breath, Jon turned and walked towards his room, next to the kitchen. Chapter 19: The Wall-Eye. Fear is a good way to control people, but it's not the most effective. Aenar Targaryen. Letting out a cloud of white air through his mouth, Jon looked at his surroundings and saw only the whiteness of thin snow wherever he looked. Closer and closer to the wall, the intense cold intensified. If the low temperature was deadly for any human being, he really wanted to know how the wild ones survived beyond the wall. Jon looked around him and soon spotted a clearing not far away. From the stones placed there, it was a camp that everyone heading towards the wall passed. Getting off his horse, Jon gently stroked the neck of the beautiful animal that had carried him here. Good boy. Tying the horse's reins to a tree, Jon took his sword, Lady Lya, from the horse and put it at his waist. This place wasn't Winterfell. There could be wildlings who, with luck, had crossed the wall and entered the north. He couldn't just stay unarmed in a place like this. Taking out his fire-starting tools, Jon expertly lit a fire and enjoyed the warmth of the orange flames with his horse. Jon took out a sack containing dried meat and ate it without a second thought while helping his horse eat what was available, frozen leaves and grass. It had been 3 days since he had left Winterfell, and from his map, he should be about a few kilometers from the long lake. Honestly, the journey time was shorter than he had expected, but as the snow was low, the journey went surprisingly quickly. It seemed that the weather wanted him to arrive at Castle Black as soon as possible. I have to be careful to cover my face. Some are soldiers who fought alongside my father in the war. They might recognize me. Jon muttered to himself as he looked up to see a light snow falling from the sky. He didn't know how many of these men were still loyal. Any whisper of his existence could alert a certain eunuch in the Red Keep, something he didn't want for himself at the moment. Leaning against a tree, Jon wrapped both arms around his sword and rested it on his shoulder, watching the flames burn along with the crackling embers. Jon wanted to sleep, but he held back. He didn't want his sister invading his dream again. It had become a routine for both of them, especially on her part. If he fell asleep, he would go into a deep sleep and Rhaenys would enter his dream again for the 1000th time. He didn't think it was a bad thing to talk to her, but this feeling of being treated like a younger brother was simply annoying, and the girl couldn't stop hugging him every time they saw each other in their dreams. Always looking at him with a look of determination, as if the most important task in her life was to protect him. Although worry warmed his heart, he was not a child. The moment he was chosen by the omniscient and omnipotent God, he was already destined to be king, and a king has no childhood, only responsibilities and duty. To this end, even though he wanted to play like any normal child, something he had never done in his past life, Jon strove to train and study every moment he could, including in his dreams, where Queen Visenya and Queen Rhaenys taught him everything they could, from blood magic to etiquette. You could say that of the 24 hours in the day, he was training 18h. All so that he could survive in the future and raise his family to heights never seen before. While Jon was thinking, he heard a twig break before silence returned to his surroundings. Without having to look around, Jon spoke in a calm tone. If you want a fire for warmth, I can share it, but if you want to fight, I'll slit your throats. No one answered Jon for long minutes, but a loud laugh was heard, along with quick, heavy footsteps. Ha 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 ha. The southern cub is brave. Hearing his words, Jon's lips twitched. It was the first time he had been called a southerner, even though it was in the north. Jon raised his head and saw a tall, strong man, accompanied by a man and a woman. They were all dressed in animal skins. Their hair was messy and they obviously hadn't bathed for days or even weeks. Savages, or as they wanted to call themselves, the free folk. Jon remained indifferent despite being outnumbered and outgunned. He had a sword and the enemy had axes and spears as weapons. From anyone's point of view, he was in a dangerous situation, but he didn't think so himself. When you can see your enemy's future blows, there are very few things that can really kill you, and the three savages were definitely not one of those people. Seeing the boy looking at him without fear, Craner couldn't help but cluck his tongue in admiration. At the boy's age, he would have been pissing himself with fear if he had come across 3 enemies alone in a forest. "Since you shared your fire, how can I hurt you, cub?" Craner smiled, showing his rotten, yellowed teeth. He walked over and sat down opposite the boy, being able to see the boy's appearance without difficulty. From the clothes and sword he was holding, Craner assumed that the cub was from a noble house of the north, perhaps even the heir to an important house. His other 2 companions also approached and sat down next to their leader. They were both looking at the child before them. The black-haired, blue-eyed woman called Grace couldn't help but be surprised by the boy's beauty. He was definitely the most handsome man she had ever seen in her life. Seeing the look on Grace's face, Craner and the other man burst into loud, boisterous laughter. "Look at Grace's face, she obviously wants to be stolen by the boy." Ha 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 ha. Her companion's taunts made the 25-year-old woman snort coldly as she punched both men in the shoulder. "Shut up, you idiot brothers," she snarled angrily as she glared at her brothers with a cold, frightening look. "TSK. That look reminds me of the ice spiders," Craner commented as she stroked his shoulder, feeling sore from her sister's punch. "How adorable, a family of 3 on a journey to death," Jon commented, throwing some more sticks on the fire. His purple eyes shone with a faint phosphorescent glow. Craner felt a shiver run through his body at the sight of those purple eyes. An emotion he hadn't known for a long time welled up in his chest. Fear. This boy was strange, very strange. As if reading his thoughts, the boy smiled and spoke with a tone that sent shivers through his body. "You're dead if you keep going towards Winterfell." "How do you know we're heading for Winterfell?" Craner forced himself to calm down and asked, the hand holding his axe tensing slightly. "Because I saw their heads rolling on the ground after being decapitated by ice, the ancestral sword of House Stark." Jon replied casually as he ate a piece of dried meat, his purple eyes staring at the 3 savages with an analyzing gaze. "If you think the people of Westeros and Essos were superstitious, you have no idea how superstitious the tree-worshipping wildlings with strange faces were. Because they came into contact with magic more often than any other people on this planet. They knew that there were gods and monsters more terrifying than gods in the depths of the frozen deserts. I want you to do something for me. If you do, I'll leave you somewhere safe," Jon asked as he tore off a piece of dried meat and chewed hard. Craner looked deeply at the boy and spoke in a lower tone, almost as if he was afraid of annoying him. "I'm listening." Don't blame him for being a coward, but only those who live in hardship know how to survive in the face of death. Jon's lips lifted in a smile, seeing that negotiations had begun. "I want you to go back beyond the wall and deliver a letter to Mance Rayder." Jon's words made the expressions of the 3 people change dramatically. "I'm never going back to that place," Grace shouted loudly as she stood up angrily. There was a deep horror hidden in her gaze. Although the other 2 didn't say anything, they both frowned deeply when they heard Jon's words. Only they know how difficult it was to climb the wall and enter the north. "You'll have a special guide. You won't get hurt," Jon said, pointing upwards. The 3 savages raised their heads and saw a raven perched on a branch of a tree. The strangest thing was that the crow had 3 eyes, a huge eye in the middle of its forehead. The 3-eyed crow. Chapter 20, The Wall 2. You love surprises or you hate them. I hate it with all my might, but maybe it's because I can see the future and I've gotten used to expecting what's to come. Aenar Targaryen said to Tyrion Lannister. Craner swallowed as he caught sight of the 3-eyed raven. Ancient legends invaded his mind as his hands began to sweat, despite the cold that surrounded him. Legends of a green seer from the children of the forests. "Don't worry, he doesn't eat people, or at least I don't think so," commented Jon with a hint of amusement in his eyes. As for the 3-eyed raven, he had never met this relative before. He had only sensed at one time someone trying to get a glimpse of his future, an arduous and, one might say, potentially deadly task. Jon, however, already knew the identity of the man behind the raven. Brynden Rivers, one of the great bastards of Westeros and illegitimate son of Aegon IV. The raven flew elegantly through the air, landing on Jon's shoulder. Its 3 eyes stared at him deeply and calmly, not like an ordinary bird, but like someone endowed with true consciousness. It was a human who looked out from behind the raven's eyes. Jon ignored the fear on the faces of the 3 savages in front of him, concentrating only on the crow perched on his shoulder. "Hello, great uncle," Jon greeted with a smile. Brynden's arrival was an unexpected but welcome surprise. The crow cawed as if in reply before taking flight again, landing next to the three savages. "I apologize for disturbing you, but I need you to guide these people to Mance Rayder," said Jon, fixing his eyes on the raven, who was now analyzing the three brothers with an intense and enigmatic gaze. Unlike Jon, the three savages felt nothing but fear and dread before those frightening eyes. "As you can see, you can return without danger. If you want, you can even bring more people. Consider it an additional reward for your services," declared Jon, looking directly at Craner. His voice was calm, but carried a majesty that made the man, already over 40, fidget uncomfortably. Faced with that regal gaze, Craner weighed up his options: accept and live or refuse and die. The choice was obvious to anyone who valued life. "We accept," he answered quickly. At that moment, he just wanted to be as far away as possible from this southern cub. He'd never seen anything so scary before. Even the White Walkers weren't as scary as a boy who seemed to know something about them. Jon nodded and took out a sheet of yellowed paper and a charcoal pencil from his bag. Something more refined would be ideal, but the North was far from offering the luxury of Essos. After about 15 minutes of writing, Jon drew a three-headed dragon at the bottom of the sheet. He then rolled up the paper and secured it with a small malleable twig. Although it wasn't a parchment fit for a king, Jon didn't mind. He had to use what he had in his hands at the moment. Watching the three savages leave with his great-uncle, Jon smiled. Although it was an unusual meeting, he liked how it turned out. With the letter sent from Mance Rayder, he could save time and weaken the undead army led by the Night King by at least a few 100,000 potential recruits. Letting out a sigh, Jon closed his eyes and began to dream. He knew that the moment he entered the dream world, he would meet his granduncle Brynden. As Jon imagined, as soon as he opened his eyes, he found himself in front of a gigantic tree with a trunk as pale as bone and crimson leaves. A deformed, weeping face could be found carved into the throne, weeping what looked like blood. It was a weirwood. Jon soon focused on the roots of the weirwood where a withered, pale man could be seen. White hair fell in disarray to the sides as the smell of the forest emanated from the man. One of his eyes was empty, showing the eyeless eye socket. He wore black leather armor and a long, worn cloak over his shoulders. Roots wrapped around his body as if he were part of the weirwood. "We met in person, Uncle Grandpa." Jon greeted the man again, his lips curved into an amused smile, noticing that the man was trying to see into his future. "Nephew, who I never saw coming, you look just like your father." Brynden spoke, his voice as hoarse as could be expected from a man 118 years old. "That's a compliment given that my father was the most handsome man on the continent." Jon shrugged as he looked curiously at his surroundings. He knew that this landscape was beyond the wall, a very beautiful place, although the giant ice spiders and the undead could affect the experience of visiting the place. Brynden let out a laugh hearing the smugness in the boy's tone. He never thought he would laugh again in this life, but here he was, smiling with his family after a long time. "It seems you have the gift to be a green seer," Brynden said, looking at the boy with white gold hair and purple eyes. "Very handsome, more handsome than any other Targaryen." He looked like a Valyrian pureblood. Sitting down on the floor, Jon replied in a calm, confident tone. "In terms of seeing the future, there is no one more powerful than me that I can say." Brynden didn't deny it and looked deeply at his great-nephew. 10 years ago he could no longer see the future as clearly as before, only vague images of the future. Previously, he had tried to find the source of the interruption of the green dreams, but when he tried to see, there was only a gigantic blue and silver vortex floating in the immensity of the void. But he suffered the brunt of seeing something he wasn't supposed to. His other eye was badly damaged, and if it hadn't been for the help of Leaf and the other children of the forest, he would have lost another eye. If Jon had heard Brynden's description, he would have known that the man was talking about the time-space nexus. He would have been even more surprised that Brynden had managed to survive in front of the most chaotic and anarchic place in the universe. "Since you claim to see the future, I assume you already knew what was coming?" Brynden asked, changing the whole atmosphere of the room, becoming serious and almost suffocating. "Yes." Jon's face also became serious. He was under a lot of pressure. Taking the throne, dealing with an army of undead and surviving a few years without sunlight, and all in less than a decade. Only he knew how much pressure he was feeling at the moment. He would have loved to play on easy mode, but the world automatically chose Dark Souls mode. "What do you plan to do?" Brynden didn't speak his own opinions about the future, instead asking about his nephew's opinions. Take the throne, fight the undead army, and live a comfortable and enjoyable long life. Jon answered with an indifferent expression. He himself knew that his own words were just self-deception, especially the last part about the long and comfortable life. He would indeed have a long life, but a long life full of problems. Brynden's lips twitched when he heard his nephew casually refer to the war that had decided the future of humanity. A world of ruins or the survival of the human race. Noticing Brynden's small movements, Jon didn't need to be a mind reader to know what the man was thinking. Don't worry, uncle. I have a dragon, an army of fanatics. Although the situation may seem extremely dangerous, I'm preparing for my reconquest in the year 296. Jon's words made Brynden show an expression of surprise. He ignored the other names and focused on the most important one. Dragon? Perhaps because he was a Targaryen, the name dragon had an irresistible charm for any Targaryen. It was like a yearning from the bottom of his heart, pulsing like a strong desire to possess something that every Targaryen should have the right to own. Yes, my brother and fellow warrior Caraxes. Jon rolled his eyes at Brynden's gaze, almost like a child listening to a favorite story. Although he could understand the longing in the man's eyes, only a dragon rider knows how wonderful the bond between rider and dragon is. Waving his hand, the dream world began to change and a huge beast appeared before them. Brynden held his breath at the sight of the huge crimson beast. It was a dragon. Caraxes at this moment was much bigger than 4 years ago. His length had grown from 20 meters (65 feet) to 51 meters (167 feet). He had twice that number of wingspan with his wings fully spread. In all honesty, Caraxes' growth exceeded Jon's expectations, but the rapid growth brought some difficulties, which were easily overlooked by thinking about the dragon's growth rate. The bigger Caraxes, the better for Jon, who could easily intimidate some dishonest people. However, the amount of food the dragon was eating was no joke. Jon had heard reports of a huge beast flying over Ice Bay and whale carcasses left on the beach. It was obvious that Caraxes was dining on whales at night. Chapter 21, The Wall 3. Fate likes to play with people, especially in a cruel and sadistic way. Aemon Targaryen. Brynden let out a genuine sigh of admiration. The beast was bigger than any boat in the world. Every part of it was a weapon capable of easily killing any human. He didn't doubt for a moment that the dragon in front of him could reduce King's Landing to ashes in just a few minutes. Caraxes, the same name as the dragon of the rogue prince, Daemon Targaryen, and the name of the god of war and violence in ancient Valyria. Brynden looked at the blood-crimson dragon and found the name appropriate for the future of House Targaryen. It had been a long time since he had felt so alive, the weight that had always been on his shoulders lighter than ever, knowing that even if he died, House Targaryen would survive with Jon. That alone was the best medicine for his tired, decaying soul. He felt 30 again, full of energy and hope for the future. I don't know your name, nephew. Brynden smiled, and his one lilac eye looked at the boy with a gentle gaze, as a grandfather would look at his grandson. Actually, Jon Snow, but my real name is Aemon Targaryen. Jon didn't hesitate to answer his great-uncle's question. Aemon. Brynden chewed the name in his mouth and smiled. It was a fitting name for the king who would establish the Targaryen dynasty once again in Westeros. For House Targaryen, the name Aemon had come to be regarded as unconditional trust in their kin over the centuries. If Aemon Targaryen the Exiled had not trusted his daughter, Daenerys the Dreamer, House Targaryen would have perished, as would all 39 dragon lords of Valyria. It was only by trusting in his daughter that the patriarch of House Targaryen sold all the family's property and settled on an island at the edge of Essos along with his dragons, slaves, and wealth. Suddenly, Brynden's vision blurred momentarily and a feeling of dizziness made his brain reel. Aemon, I don't have much time. We'll talk later, but before I go there are 2 items you should take. They're with Aemon, Mikar's son. Aemon is serving as Maester at Castle Black. Brynden commented, feeling the weight of his powers reappear in his body. Jon nodded, and before he could do anything, he felt his vision darken. He woke up and found himself back in the cold room with the fire still burning in orange flames. It felt like hours had passed in the dream, but it hadn't been half an hour in the real world. He didn't get up and stood leaning against the tree while hugging his sword, Lady Lya. It felt like he was hugging his mother. It was his way of thinking that she was always with him, killing anyone who dared to hurt him. Jon couldn't help but think of Brynden's words. 2 presents? Although he was curious, he didn't look into the future with his prescience and wanted to see for himself what surprise Brynden could bring him. A few more days. Muttering to himself, Jon closed his eyes and rested. He didn't sleep, he just had his eyes closed. On the white snow, a drop of blood dripped from the sharp point of the sword and stained the immaculate color a shade of red. Jon looked at the corpses around him and remained indifferent. The corpses were men wearing traditional northern clothing, all with a clean wound to the throat, while the eyes of all the corpses were still open as if they couldn't believe they had died. Warm blood dripped from their necks onto the snow, where it quickly froze when it came into contact with the snow, creating pools of frozen blood. It wasn't the first time Jon had taken human life, and it definitely wouldn't be the last. The first time, he threw up all his breakfast, but after killing a few more times he began to get used to taking lives, but he knew that this familiarity was a terrible fact. He had to control his bloodlust or he would kill a man on any whim in the distant future, something he didn't want to happen. Sheathing Lady Lyra in the scabbard, the sword went in with a slashing sound. Jon looked at the 5 corpses for a moment and got back on his horse. As for burying their bodies, he didn't even bother doing the work, the animals would do it for him. Jon grabbed the reins and shook them as the horse began to ride again. Northern horses were tall and robust, had a thicker coat to protect them from the cold, and were especially docile and fierce when the need arose. They were the favorite horses of the northern lords. They weren't cheap. Apart from the care they needed, they cost a commoner's house. It had been days since he had found Brynden and the 3 savages. Every night when he closed his eyes, he dreamt of Brynden, the 2 of them sharing their ideas and advice for the future of the war. Having someone as experienced as Brynden helped him to see certain angles that he hadn't considered before. Advice that Jon was very grateful for, as he had forgotten important points before. Especially when it came to the Crown's marine forces. Brynden told him to seek out the Lord of Driftmark, Montford Valerion, and the man would bend the knee to him when he proved that he really was Rhaegar's son. According to Brynden, by getting Montford, he could have around 30% to 40% of the Crown's ships without any problem. It was an efficient way to strike a blow at House Baratheon's back at the right time. Imagine in a decisive war, 40% of the ships would attack their allies from behind. This made Jon realize that he shouldn't ignore certain noble houses because he had a dragon. Dragons were the sharpest weapons against the lords and lattice of Westeros, and the people were their toughest shield. As the horse rode swiftly along the King's Road, Jon gradually saw a gigantic wall of ice rising towards the sky. The image of such a huge construction made in medieval times was enough to make Jon admire human ingenuity. The wall was mainly made of ice. It was 300 miles, 482 kilometers long, and its height was an impressive 700 feet, 213 meters. It was such a spectacular sight that Jon held his breath for a moment, afraid that his breathing would somehow affect the way he remembered the wall. Snapping out of his stupor, Jon continued riding, arriving in front of a stone wall and imposing wooden gates. Before entering, he pulled the hood of his cloak over his face and approached. He couldn't be recognized by his father's old comrades in arms. Even if it made him look even more suspicious, he didn't care. The raven sent by his uncle should have already arrived, announcing his imminent arrival. Whoever approaches Castle Black. Above the stone wall, a man shouted towards the lone figure riding the horse. Jon Snow of Winterfell. Jon replied in an equally loud voice. After a moment's silence, the gates opened and Jon shook the reins and rode forward on his horse. Castle Black wasn't really a castle, it was more like a fortress. There was only one wall in the north of the castle, with no other walls to defend it. It looked old and obviously lacked maintenance in many parts. Another thing he noticed was that most of the buildings were made of wood, which if you think about the cold and extremely wet climate, was definitely not the best material to build with, but everything seemed in order. As soon as Jon entered Castle Black, he felt countless eyes on him, which he thought was normal. It wasn't every day that someone came to Castle Black. Many of the eyes were calm, only a few showed a real interest in his presence in this place. Jon looked around and couldn't find the figure of Brynden, his uncle who had joined the Night's Watch 10 years ago. Unlike Eddard, Brynden was a tall and very cheerful man, not at all like his older brother. As Jon was looking around, a man dressed in black approached him. He noticed that the man was a slim man in his 50s with striking features. His physique appeared to be lean and hard, as well as compact and muscular. His black eyes resembled onyx or obsidian, and his black hair was streaked with gray. Alliser Thorne, and in another reality his killer. Funny that the man killed the son of the man he swore allegiance to. Chapter 22, The Wall 4. How does it feel to be the last of something? This loneliness and desolation is something I wouldn't wish on even my greatest enemy. Aenar Targaryen in front of old Maester Aemon. Lord Commander Mormont awaits you at the Lord Commander's keep. Alliser spoke, his voice cold and indifferent, his eyes not hiding the contempt he felt towards him. Although bastards didn't suffer so much in the north, the same couldn't be said for bastards in the south, where the faith of the Seven was extremely widespread. Alliser Thorne, like any southern lord, didn't like bastards, although all men wouldn't turn down a pussy, even if it wasn't their own wife's. Men liked the pleasure of infidelity. Men liked the pleasure of infidelity, but they didn't like the bastards that would come with it, so instead of taking the blame, they put it on the mother and her son. The words of the Church of the Seven were merely a ruse for them not to assume the responsibilities they should have and to prevent these children from having any claim on their fiefdom. Jon nodded and got off his horse. After stroking the horse's neck, he left it in the hands of the Night's Watch member and followed Alliser towards the chambers of the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Still wearing a hood to cover his appearance, Jon looked at Alliser's back. The man, despite his terrible personality, was a good warrior, which could be seen by the way the man walked. An identical, steady gait with properly controlled steps. However, Jon didn't try to talk to Alliser. The man didn't like him and he wasn't someone who flattered others. On the contrary, it was everyone who should flatter him. Noticing his own thoughts, Jon felt that he was spending too much time with Queen Rhaenys and Queen Visenya. The etiquette teacher in particular was someone who liked attention, especially the envious looks of the other women. His fencing and flying teacher, on the other hand, was extremely proud and strong, not letting herself be influenced by other people. The two women acted as his mothers, subtly influencing the way he thought and saw the world. Perhaps that was the duty of a mother, to introduce the world to her son, and the father should prepare his son for the challenges of life. Rhaenys and Visenya were mother and father to Jon, who had never been raised by a mother or father in 2 lifetimes. Without realizing it, Jon was led to a tower where he climbed the spiral staircase until he found himself in front of a massive wooden door. He saw Alliser knock respectfully on the door and then heard an extraordinarily powerful voice. "Come in." With permission given, Jon finally saw the 997th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Jeor Mormont. Jeor Mormont was an old man, his head was shorn and his grey, unkempt beard covered most of his chest. The former Lord of the Bear Islands wore a thick black fur cloak, and for formal occasions he wears a black woolen doublet with silver claw clasps. Not far away, a raven perched on a stick was analyzing the new arrivals with a rather arrogant expression for a mere raven. "How's Lord Stark, boy?" Jeor looked at Eddard Stark's bastard and asked, his voice hoarse but powerful. "With 5 sons and a 6th on the way." Jon replied with a touch of humor, causing the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch to let out a loud and powerful laugh. "House Stark doesn't have to worry about an heir for long." Jeor spoke with a sigh, but Jon noticed a hint of sadness in the man's battle-hardened gaze. He didn't need to be a genius to know that the man was thinking of his son, Jorah Mormont, who was now just in exile in Essos. "I hear your new niece, Lyanna, is a strong girl with superior intelligence. Lord Stark even gave her a warhammer as a present," Jon said, remembering the girl who was incomparably loyal to House Stark. Even though she was only 3 years old, she acted more maturely than many men. The mention of his youngest niece made the Lord Commander smile. He had earned ravens from his sister Meege telling him about his new niece. Knowing that the girl had won a warhammer from Lord Stark himself made him feel an enormous sense of satisfaction well up in his chest. "Ha ha ha. The girl has Mormont blood." Jeor spoke in a very good mood. He even looked at his liege lord's bastard with a kinder and warmer gaze, despite still having a stern appearance. As Visenya once said, always praise descendants when you're in front of a lord. There's nothing more satisfying for a lord than the continuation of his house. Jon thought, listening to Jeor Mormont's loud laughter and bold words. Visenya was right. People in this world cared little for their own lives. Many would give their lives if they could make their noble houses survive longer. Perhaps that's why the noble houses of Westeros could survive for millennia without interruption. Lord Stark has already sent a raven to explain your situation. Your quarters have been prepared and you will eat with us, but be aware that the food is certainly not as good as Winterfell's, boy. Gior placed some corn in front of the raven and explained in a calm tone, but with obvious good humor. Jon nodded and didn't mind the food Gior mentioned. If there was one thing he wasn't, it was fussy about food. In his past life he had lived most of his life in a hospital, and hospital food could be many things, but delicious was not one of them. Alliser, take Snow to his quarters. Without looking at Alliser, Gior ordered in a powerful voice. Yes, Lord Commander. Alliser replied seriously and took the bastard with him, leaving the solar of the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Sir Alliser, I'd like to know where the library is. I'd like to do some research. Leaving the Lord Commander's tower, Jon asked, looking around for any sign of Castle Black's library. The library can only be accessed with permission from Maester Aemon. Alliser replied with a cold, condescending tone, pointed to one of the castle's towers and spoke. That is your residence, the empty and clean room is yours. Having said that, without waiting for Jon's reply, Alliser left with a cold stare as his black cloak dragged on the ground. Someone has a strong temper, but now I know how to find Aemon. Jon muttered to himself as his lips curved into a smile. With the information Alliser had told him earlier, Jon had no trouble finding the room he would probably spend months in before returning to Winterfell. However, he didn't stay in the room and soon set off to find the person who would help him find his great-uncle. For Aemon, Jon felt genuine admiration. After all, how many people did you know who could refuse to be king? Who would put family above a throne? Jon admired Aemon for what he represented, an honorable man with a determined heart. Jon stopped in front of an extremely short man, no more than 150 centimeters tall, about 4 feet 9 inches. There were only a few strands of hair on his bald head. He had no chin and his shoulders looked rounded. Surprisingly, despite his ugly appearance, he had one of the most beautiful eyes Jon had ever seen, a very pretty shade of dark pink. I'd like permission to access the library. Jon spoke directly to his purpose, making the short, chinless man nod. He didn't seem surprised by a new face in Castle Black. Apparently the news of a visitor's arrival had already spread quickly. Follow me, Snow. Clydas spoke, his voice slurred and slightly hoarse, as he moved his small body towards a more secluded part of Castle Black. Jon didn't mind and followed the man a few paces behind him. Maester Aemon is old. Should I have any concerns? Jon asked, trying to sound as subtle as possible. He doesn't like loud sounds and boys who don't know the value of a book. Clydas replied with a respectful tone as he looked over his shoulder at the hooded boy. Only his chin could be seen from the angle he was looking at. Noting the man's respectful tone, Jon knew that Clydas knew Aemon's identity, which wasn't surprising, given that Clydas had been helping his great-uncle for decades. We're here. Clydas spoke, stopping in front of the wooden tower, as simple and rustic as anywhere in Castle Black. Jon could hear the cawing of crows not far away, showing that he was close to the nursery, where the crows were fed. Clydas opened the door to the tower and a smell of old books assaulted Jon's sense of smell. Stepping inside, Jon saw a simple room not at all befitting a Targaryen prince, a similarity he and Aemon shared. Scanning the room, Jon's purple eyes fixed on the old figure walking through the room. He held a book in his arms while his maester's chain rattled gently. Jon needed no introduction to the man, he knew him too well. Aemon Targaryen, son of Mikar I and brother of Aegon V, uncle of Jaehaerys II and great-uncle of Aerys II. Chapter 23, Enar and Aemon I. The longer you live, the more knowledge you accumulate. That phrase was a perfect fit for Aemon Targaryen, son of Mikar I. The man was a living, walking library. Enar Targaryen on Maester Aemon. Jon felt an unconscionable fury lurking behind his great-uncle's apparent serenity. He was absolutely certain that if Aemon had been young and strong, he would have taken up a sword and infiltrated King's Landing, ready to slay the mortal enemies of House Targaryen. Of that, Jon had no doubt. The man of almost 100 years in front of him hid a fury as great as a volcano, ready to bring death and ashes to nourish the soil again. Maester Aemon, Jon Snow, Eddard Stark's bastard, wishes to ask permission to visit Castle Black's library. Clydas approached Aemon and helped the old man carry the book in his arms. The man's pale, blind lilac eyes fell on the 10-year-old in an instant, and Jon felt a shiver run through his body at the sight of those eyes, which could no longer see. A wise, gentle gaze, but it hid a powerful feeling sharpened by time. He couldn't see, but Jon felt that he could still see the outline of something, even if it was such a blurred image. Does young Snow wish to have knowledge? Aemon asked, his slow steps approaching a chair slightly away from the fireplace. We all need knowledge, we're no different from animals without it controlled by our emotions. Jon replied with a smile as he removed the hood that hid his face. Clydas looked at the young man in surprise. For some reason, the bastard's eyes reminded him of those of Maester Aemon. Although the color was different, the feeling was the same, as if he were looking at a prince, or in the case of the young man in front of him, the eyes of a king. Aemon stopped his slow steps for a moment and replied in his slightly hoarse, weak voice. Wise words, young Snow. What brings you to the wall? He continued to ask as he moved towards the chair. The man had lived in this tower for so long that he already knew where every item was, even if he couldn't see it. To observe the creation of my ancestors and to see someone very important to me. Jon helped Aemon to sit down and sat next to the old man, the heat from the fireplace warming the whole room without a problem. A relative? Aemon repeated the question to himself, while a nostalgic smile appeared on his lips, as if remembering something long lost. Certainly. Jon confirmed, looking at the old maester in front of him. He looked small and bent by age, but despite being almost 100 years old, he exuded an impressive vitality in his will and determination. When I found out he existed, all I could think about was telling him that I existed too, so that he wouldn't feel alone in such a cold and distant world. Aemon let out a surprised expression when he heard those words. The man young Snow was talking about seemed to share the same burden as him. Alone. Aemon knew that feeling well. No one should have to endure such loneliness, without a family to lean on in difficult times. The old maester's lips trembled, and the anger he had felt 10 years ago bubbled up again in his chest, only to be quickly subdued by his self-control. Tell me, Maester Aemon, what would you do if you knew that what you were about to do could bring death and misery to an entire continent? Jon asked, looking away from the flames in the fireplace. For a moment, he saw the fire come to life, transforming into a dragon that incinerated an entire city. Screams of horror and despair echoed in his ears. Yet Jon's expression remained indifferent, even in the face of that terrifying sight. Because of his powers, he was more than used to facing death up close. If he were to count all the times he had witnessed someone die, he could very well spend a lifetime listing them. You seem to carry a heavy burden, Jon Snow. Placing his hands on his knees, Aemon said. But if you want my advice, I'll give it to you. Kill the boy and let the man be born. I killed the boy a long time ago. Jon's lips curved into a sad smile at his words. I killed him the moment I decided to be king. A deafening, suffocating silence hung in the air. Even Clydas didn't dare breathe for fear of disturbing what was about to happen. He looked at Eddard Stark's bastard and assumed something he'd never thought in his life. Aemon's hands trembled, not only that, his soul trembled. He rose from his chair and approached the young man. Raising his hands, Aemon felt another pair of hands grasp his and guide them to the warm touch of a face. Without delay, her hands traced the contours of his face. He could feel his hands trembling as the familiar contours were drawn in his mind. It was a completely different face, but there was a familiarity that he could never forget. Egg, you look like Egg, my brother. The words that left his lips were something Aemon never thought he would say again. You're the son of Rhaegar and Lady Lyanna Stark. Aemon came to the conclusion in an instant. He had exchanged letters with the prince and remembered vividly that the man had told him that his second wife was pregnant. Aemon kept moving his hands over Jon's face, as if he thought that when he stopped, it was just a joke his mind was playing on him. Tears streamed down his cheeks as the almost 100-years-old man hugged one of his only remaining relatives on the continent, and perhaps in the whole world, with fervor and emotion. Jon couldn't help but smile and hugged the old man, feeling his body tremble. He knew exactly what it felt like to be alone, but unlike Aemon, instead of being dead, his past-life relatives simply abandoned him when they learned that he had no chance of survival. You're not dreaming, and I'm more than real, great-uncle, Jon said, patting the old maester on the back, treating him like a child. However, his eyes fell on Clydas, who desperately wanted to reduce his sense of existence at this moment. Clydas swallowed dryly. He wished he was deaf at that moment, because the purple eyes staring at him were very frightening. He knew exactly what that look meant. If he dared to say anything, he'd be dead. Tell me how you grew up. Aemon broke away from the embrace and, still holding Jon's arm, he asked with a smile that seemed very innocent, like a grandfather wanting to hear his grandson's stories. Jon didn't refuse and began to tell without hiding anything. He didn't hide the treatment he suffered from Catelyn at Winterfell. However, he talked about happy things for the most part. He didn't want to cause an angry heart attack in an old man nearly 100 years old. Aemon nodded in satisfaction at the way his grandnephew had done over the years, especially when it came to how to deal with Catelyn. You did well not to submit to Lady Stark. People like that get even more unscrupulous as time goes by. She would have killed you if you'd shown yourself to be weak. Still, the thought of the heir to his house being treated with such disrespect was simply unacceptable to him. Fortunately, according to Jon, Lord Stark was an honorable human and managed to control his wife before things got even worse. Don't worry, great uncle, I know how to control myself. I don't want to leave my cousins motherless so soon. Although I won't deny that I dreamt about the redfish being eaten by Caraxes. Jon replied with a proud smile. Not once or twice had he wanted to turn Catelyn into dragon food, but he'd never gone through with the idea. He didn't want his cousins to grow up without a mother, something essential for the growth and maturation of any child. Caraxes? Aemon asked with a curious tone. He certainly knew that it was the name of the Valyrian god of violence and war, as well as the name of a very famous dragon from House Targaryen. He assumed that Jon had given the name to a ferocious dog. My dragon Caraxes. Jon replied casually as he looked at Aemon with a smiling look. He really enjoyed seeing people's reactions when he revealed the truth about Caraxes. Aemon remained silent for a moment as if processing the extremely important information, and when he did, it caused an expression of shock to appear on Jon's face. Can I fly it? He asked, his voice not hiding his excitement and curiosity, almost like a child asking to drive his father's car. His words made Jon start laughing. Ha 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 ha. Looks like your flame hasn't gone out yet, Uncle Aemon. Jon said with a big smile appearing on his lips. And yes, I'm taking you flying in Caraxes. Chapter 24, Enar and Aemon 2. What makes you a king? The crown? The throne? The armies, perhaps? But I tell you, all this is the result of one thing. The prestige you have built up over the years. Only that will make you and your descendants respected in the eyes of the people, and with that the crown, the throne, and the armies will appear before you as naturally as rain falling on the ground. Enar Targaryen, age 13, after the beginning of the Reconquest. Are you sure you want the throne, nephew? Aemon asked, his frail, hoarse voice carrying a hint of concern. Even with a dragon, he knew all too well the difficulties Jon would have to go through to sit on the Iron Throne. Yes, I've been preparing for this since I was 4 and I can't back down. Jon replied, raising the glass of water Clydas had respectfully served him to his lips. There was no going back on his decision. It was king or die trying, even if he didn't think he would lose the Game of Thrones. With a sigh, Aemon said, Please, Clydas, go under my bed. You'll see a loose wooden plank, take it out and get the hidden chest. Clydas obeyed the order, and under Jon's surprised eyes, the man took out a low chest from a secret compartment under a false wooden plank. Nephew, I can't help you, I'm just a blind old man, but I hope this will be of some help. Aemon spoke, his voice carrying a hint of emotion. If possible, he wanted to be like his counterpart, Aemon the Dragon Knight, but he couldn't and didn't have the strength for that. However, he could help his nephew with one last thing. The first item is mine, it was given to me at birth like all Targaryen princes and princesses. The second item was given to me by Brynden Rivers, Lord Bloodraven, one of the great bastards of Westeros. Aemon explained as Clydas opened the chest, revealing an egg and a sword. The egg looked more like a work of art than an egg, its scales were silver with purple stripes, it looked bigger than any egg in the world. A dragon's egg. Jon immediately recognized the origin of the egg. It was a very beautiful dragon egg, resembling a mixture of silver and amethyst. As for the sword, Jon also immediately recognized its origin. Dark Sister. There was no way he couldn't recognize the sword that had made him taste defeat countless times at the hands of its owner, Queen Visenya I Targaryen. Jon approached the chest and held the sword by the hilt, raising it high as he appreciated the beauty of the Valyrian steel. It's beautiful, but it was made for a woman's hands. He commented with some emotion in his tone. Though it was a more than exquisite sword, it was not made for large hands but for small or medium ones. Aemon smiled and replied, It doesn't matter, a sword is made to kill and only for that. Jon agreed, but Dark Sister was different. Together with Blackfire, they were the symbols of the Targaryen dynasty. Both swords could strengthen the solidity of his future rule. It may sound strange, but prestige was something real and incredibly powerful. Would you trust a descendant of a powerful king or a nameless peasant? Even after nearly 300 years, the names of Aegon, Jaehaerys, Daeron, and many other wise Targaryen kings helped their descendants stabilize House Targaryen's rule over Westeros. This alone shows how powerful it was to have prestige. Even if you weren't a great talent, many people would still follow you just because you were the descendant of great men. Leaving the Dark Sister aside, Jon held up the dragon egg and smiled as he felt the warm touch pass through his hand. It was a living dragon egg. The dragon egg is beautiful. Jon complimented with a sincere tone. It really was a beautiful dragon egg. It was my mother, Lady Diana Dane, who chose it for me when I was just a wrinkled baby. Aemon replied with a happy smile, listening to Jon's words. At the same time, he regretted that his egg hadn't hatched like his nephews before him. But his next words brought Aemon to a halt. I can make it hatch, Jon said with a smile. If in terms of happiness he couldn't be happier than this moment, he won the Dark Sister and a dragon, how could he not be happy? After a while, Aemon let out a sigh of regret. Unfortunately, I'm old. Jon had no way to change that, at least not now, maybe in the future when his powers matured even more. But his uncle Aemon couldn't wait decades, he was almost 100 years old. Aemon didn't regret it for long and recovered in a few minutes. He had already lived almost 100 years, he had lived long enough. At this point he just wanted to see his house return to Jon's hands. As for the rest, he would let fate decide his end. Like all men and women. A few months later. You're too rigid, remember that as warriors you don't wear plate armor, use this advantage of being light to your advantage. Don't just stand around defending, attack when you should attack and retreat when you should retreat. Jon commented as he walked in circles around 3 new Night's Watch recruits. The 3 were young, too young, the youngest no more than 12 and the oldest 15. All in prison for stealing food to survive. It wasn't just these 3 young men that Jon taught, there were other men from the Night's Watch watching him closely. Jon made no secret of the fact that he was teaching everyone everything he had learned from one of the strongest warriors Westeros had ever seen, Queen Visenya I Targaryen. The 3 young men listened to his advice and advanced on Jon with swords of steel, though the blades were blunt. Clang! 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 Jon dodged the attacks and parried another with an ease that made the onlookers sigh with sincere admiration. Your nephew is truly a great warrior, Brynden. Jeor Mormont, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, spoke in rare praise of Eddard Stark's young bastard. The idea of the boy being his successor was a pleasant one, but unfortunately fate didn't want it to happen. It wasn't hard to see that the Lord of Winterfell would probably ask the king to legitimize his bastard. Fortunately, he still had an heir, the same man he was standing next to. Brynden, a man of typical Stark appearance. Brown hair, gray eyes and a long face, he smiled with pride as he watched the young man skillfully fight 3 opponents without difficulty. The boy has always been a prodigy, praised by my brother as the second coming of Ser Arthur Dayne and Aemon the Dragon Knight. Brynden commented with a smile. Jeor nodded in agreement. To earn this level of praise from the Silent Wolf showed that Jon truly had a great talent for fencing. So how are things going? Jeor asked, showing a rare look of dignity. Brynden showed a dignified expression as well. Not well, it's not just the savages that are migrating in large numbers, even the animals are migrating south in large numbers. Almost like. Brynden didn't have to continue for Jeor to understand what he meant. Like running from something extremely frightening. Jeor finished his words with a serious, calm expression. Though he didn't want to believe it, he knew something strange was happening beyond the wall, something big enough to drive all the wild tribes south. Brynden nodded with a worried look on his face. I'm going to Winterfell and the other kingdoms to pick up some new recruits in case something happens. Brynden spoke, earning a nod from the Lord Commander. They desperately needed manpower to cover more ground and defend the wall more effectively. Okay, that's all for today. You can rest. Jon calmly ended the training. Apart from a thin layer of sweat on his forehead, he didn't show that he had just fought 3 people at once. Yes, instructor. The 3 young men spoke at the same time, looking at Jon with obvious admiration in their eyes. Jon nodded and returned to Maester Aemon's terra. As soon as he entered, a shadow descended from the ceiling and fell over him. Jon didn't flinch and opened his arms, letting the winged creature rest against his chest. Looking down, he saw a beautiful baby dragon. No bigger than a puppy, it had shiny silver scales with purple spots, making the dragon cub a sight to behold. It was the dragon that had hatched from Maester Aemon's egg. It had been born for just over a month, and Jon already knew who the future rider of this beautiful little dragon was. She's as lively as a 5-year-old, curious about everything. Aemon approached Jon, and surprisingly, his eyes didn't seem blind. Blood magic really was a magic capable of curing many things, including blindness. But Jon hadn't cured Aemon's eyes. To cure blindness, the blood of dozens of people had to be sacrificed. Something that Maester Aemon refused to do after learning of the price. In the end, Jon opted to temporarily cure Aemon's blindness. It wasn't a permanent solution, it only lasted a few hours a day, but it was more than enough for Aemon. And the price for such a thing was not great, just 1 rabbit a day. Aemon's eyes gazed at the dragon on his nephew's chest with a kind and warm gaze. It was the most beautiful creature he had ever seen in his life, and he thanked the gods for being able to personally witness the birth of such a creature. Aemon even wrote a book, teaching how to hatch a dragon according to Jon, so that future generations would never make House Targaryen weak again. "I'm leaving, uncle. I have many things to prepare and convince Eddard to go to war," Jon said, making the old maester let out a sigh. Although he knew this day would come, he still felt lonely knowing that he was about to part with Jon. Someone he had begun to think of as a grandson in the short space of a few months. "Be careful and don't hesitate to ask me for help with anything," Aemon spoke with a hint of concern appearing in his gaze. "I will, uncle." Jon showed a serious expression. It was time to start throwing this continent into the flames of war again. Chapter 25, The Queen and the Exiled Princesses. I lived in exile for 13 years, but instead of succumbing to the hardships and dangers of the situation, I changed my mindset and stopped being a weak queen and became the queen my daughters needed. Queen Mother, Rhaella I Targaryen. Continent of Essos in the free city of Bravos. Ser Willem Darry walked through the crowd with a cloak covering his appearance, his hand on the hilt of his sword, his eyes scanning his surroundings for followers or enemies with surprising ease. Don't blame him for being so paranoid, but having just been attacked by assassins, anyone would be the same way. Finally realizing that he wasn't being followed, he entered an alleyway and soon saw a discreet house that was hard to see unless you looked closely. Willem knocked on the door with a specific knock, almost as if he was speaking a secret code to whoever was on the other side of the door. The next second, the door opened and a woman in her 30s appeared in front of the Master-at-Arms of the Red Keep. Willem didn't hesitate, and without waiting for the woman's words, he entered the house and the door was closed at the same moment. Suddenly, the woman's face changed slightly as she smelled the strong scent of blood. "Are you hurt, sir?" the woman asked with a worried look on her face. "Some assassins attacked me in the harbor, but I'm unharmed. But we must leave Bravos, your grace," Willem said, leaning back in his chair and letting out a tired, exhausted sigh. It wasn't just the assassins who had attacked him. A week ago the men he claimed to be loyal to betrayed him and almost caused the death of Princess Daenerys. If Princess Visenya hadn't killed one of the guards in the nick of time, things would have ended in a tragedy he could never forgive himself for. The woman Willem was talking to had platinum hair and beautiful lilac eyes. If any of the nobles of Westeros were present, they might recognize her as Queen Rhaella I Targaryen, wife of Aerys II, the Mad King. Rhaella was not an indecisive woman. The events of the past week had already alarmed her enough to know that Bravos was far from safe. "Let's leave Bravos and go to another city." Rhaella made the decision in an instant. "Your Grace, if I may, I think it would be best to go to Volantis." Willem spoke, catching her attention with his words. "What do you suggest, Ser Willem?" Rhaella asked with a calm expression. She didn't refuse and waited for his words. "Volantis has become a holy city in the eyes of all Red Faith believers. If we can take refuge in Volantis, no assassin will dare attack a city full of crazed fanatics." Willem spoke calmly, hiding nothing from his queen. Rhaella hesitated. As Willem had said, the entire city of Volantis had been completely transformed 4 years ago. The true rulers of the city changed in less than a year, making the city of Volatins a true theocratic city. The Reverend Mother called Kinvara became the ruler of the city. With a well-trained army of over 20,000, Volantis was now a safer city to live in than Essos, especially with the Dothraki Khal plundering the free cities and every caravan that passed through. But Rhaella hesitated. What if she and her daughters were arrested if their identities were discovered? The thought of her daughters in danger tormented her, but in the end she realized she had no choice. Staying in Braavos was asking to be attacked by endless waves of assassins sent by Robert and Tywin. Going to Volantis was a gamble, but when you think about it, all the others were gambles too. Volantis was less of a gamble at the moment, especially given the rumors of the Red Faith's kindness and generosity over the past 4 years. Riella had made up her mind. "Let's go to Volantis, Sir Willem." Willem nodded and stood up, preparing to leave. Riella watched the old man disappear into his room with a grateful and emotional look on her face. Without Willem, she really didn't know how she, a woman who had never worked or done anything but sew and read, would survive in exile. Don't get it wrong, Riella had long since ceased to be a weak and submissive queen. The years in exile had forged her in the flames of hardship, burned away any weakness and hesitation that still lingered within her. But it wasn't so at first. Like everyone else, she gradually grew stronger, and that time was essential in changing her mentality. But that time wouldn't have existed without Willem's help. The man provided that precious time, and she lived up to her daughter's expectations, becoming a warrior and a survivor in those 10 years of exile. On her way to her room, Riella opened the door and saw 2 girls, one older and one younger. The younger one was 10 years old, small and delicate, with platinum hair and lovely, very expressive lilac eyes. She was as beautiful as a doll made by the gods. A beauty that would surely make many men fall in love with her when she grew up. It was her youngest daughter, Daenerys Targaryen. The eldest girl was 17, with straight white hair that fell over her shoulders and back in a cascade of silky, shining strands. Her features were delicate and sweet, her eyes a very vivid and beautiful shade of violet. She was relatively tall, about 169 centimeters, 5 feet 6 inches. She was his eldest daughter, Arya Targaryen. "Mom!" Daenerys exclaimed as she saw her mother enter the room. The 10-year-old put down the book she was reading and smiled brightly at her mother. That smile made all the worry, exhaustion, and fear of the future disappear as if it had never existed. "Hello, my adorable little dragon," Riella said, kissing both of her daughter's cheeks. "Mom." Daenerys pulled away and spoke with an unhappy tone. "I'm not a child anymore." Riella smiled and didn't deny it. Her daughter might look innocent, but she had been trained since childhood to protect herself. The girl was not only skilled with daggers, but also with poisons. Visenya was the complete opposite of Daenerys. Like her counterpart, her daughter was a warrior princess who used a sword with such mastery that it would put most men to shame. Although it wasn't something a princess should learn, Riella discovered that only strength could keep her and her family alive in exile, so she always encouraged her daughters to train during the day and read at night to improve their knowledge. Only then could her family survive and have a chance to reclaim everything that belonged to them. "We will move to Volantis, but before we do, you must dye your hair black." Riella spoke in a serious tone. 3 platinum-haired women accompanied by an old knight was simply too conspicuous, something they should avoid until they reached Volantis. Visenya and Daenerys' faces changed dramatically when they heard their mother's words. Neither hesitated or objected. Unity was what House Targaryen needed, and now it was. 3 members completely united and with a coordination that would impress most strategists. Visenya and Daenerys acted quickly, the one looking for the items needed for the hair dye, and the other girl starting to prepare all the clothes they would wear to disguise themselves. Seeing her daughters act so quickly and without question, Riella smiled with relief. Even if she were to die for some reason, she was confident that her daughters could survive on their own. After some thought, Riella began helping her daughters immediately, helping Daenerys pack the clothes and items they would take to Volantis, especially the jewelry. It was their last source of income, should they need it in the future. As for the jewels and the crown, Riella didn't care at all, even if they had been the jewels of her former queens. Her daughter's safety was the most important thing to her, everything else was secondary. And never would a jewel be more important than feeding her daughters. It took an hour for everything to be ready. By then Riella, Visenya, and Daenerys were wearing black hair and clothes that covered almost all of their skin, leaving only their eyes and a few locks of black hair showing. This was a common outfit for anyone venturing into the deserts of Essos, so it was one of the most common outfits to be found in the free cities. "Let's go." Riella spoke without any nostalgia for the house she had sheltered for 5 years. Her home was in the Red Fortress, any other house was just something to pass the time and shelter from the rain and sun. Everyone nodded and left the Red Door house. Daenerys looked back at the red door, which she would probably never forget. Chapter 26, The Queen and the Exiled Princesses 2. Can we change destiny with our choices? Perhaps, but that answer can only be answered by my God. Reverend Mother Kinvara of the Great Red Temple of Volantis. Volantis, the first daughter. It was the most populous and proud city of the 9 free cities. It used to be a fortress belonging to the now-destroyed freehold Valyrian. Now it was nothing more than a wealthy port city ruled by nobles of freehold Valyrian descent. However, all that changed 4 years ago. Now Volantis was ruled by the Red Faith, led by the Reverend Mother Kinvara. Dany looked at the city of Volantis and couldn't help but notice how different it was from the others she had lived in. The first thing was the city's tall towers, red and burning with a seemingly unquenchable fire. Whether it was wind or rain, the flame never went out, or at least that's what she heard on the way to Volantis. Another thing she noticed was the climate, humid and hot. The air seemed heavy with a slightly suffocating atmosphere. The smell wasn't the most pleasant either, reeking of sweat and elephant dung. There was a sweet dead smell behind it, which she didn't try to guess what it was. Daenerys felt she had to change her clothes as soon as possible, or she would simply faint from the heat. Taking off her silk hood, she let down her long hair and sighed with relief. She felt less suffocated in her clothes, although she still felt dirty from sweating. "Do we have to live in this place?" Dany asked, looking at her mother, who was gazing at the city with a seemingly calm and strong gaze. "Yes, dear. This town will be our new home at least for a while," Riella replied, noticing that the carriage was getting closer and closer to an entrance checkpoint guarded by guards in red armor. Armor that reminded her of Westeros style, which was surprising given that they were in Essos. "I don't know how they can stand being in that armor in such intense sunshine," Visenya asked herself with a curious look. "Probably magic, Vi. I read that the priests of the Red Temple weren't afraid of the heat." Daenerys answered her sister while looking at the same guards with a very curious look. Visenya nodded and asked no more, remaining silent as the carriage arrived in front of the guards in red armor. The guard approached, he looked at everyone in the carriage and spoke with a reverent tone towards his god. "May God's blessing protect you, travelers from afar." She noticed the bastardized version of the High Valyrian of the guard, something common in all the 9 free cities. They all had their bastardized versions. There were really few people who could speak pure freehold Valyrian. "Thank you, may your God protect you." Riella returned the words with an equally reverent tone. Was she a believer in the Red God or, as he was now called, the Omnipotent and Omniscient God? The answer was no, but she knew how to lie simply exquisitely. The guard nodded and spoke. "I'd like you to answer a few questions." "You may ask, Guardian," Riella said without any hesitation. "Where do you 4 come from?" he asked. "Bravos," she replied. "Any sign of Dothraki on the road to Volantis?" "Just a few small bands of 5 to 10 men, but no attacks." Riella answered all the questions without hesitation or fear. At the same time, she was surprised by the professionalism of the Volantis guards. They were polite but powerful at the same time. And seeing the people looking at the guards with respect, it was obvious that they had a lot of prestige among the common people. Something the Golden Cloaks had long since lost in King's Landing. The guard nodded at her words and didn't seem surprised by the news. No deity other than the Omnipotent and Omniscient God is allowed inside the city. Such a breach of the law is punishable by beheading. Riella nodded. She didn't believe in any god, not anymore, just her family. House Targaryen has no respect for the laws of men or gods. With permission to enter the city, the carriage driven by Ser Willem entered the city while Daenerys looked at the streets with curiosity. She saw elephants being ridden by people. They were huge and could easily crush her small body with a single step. Daenerys wondered how big Balerion was to be able to swallow something like a mammoth. However, she soon put these questions behind her and concentrated on seeing every corner of the city with eyes full of curiosity about everything. Visenya, seeing her sister acting like that, couldn't help but smile gently. They usually spent days locked up in their rooms studying or training, rarely able to go outside for obvious reasons. The one time she went out alone, she was almost kidnapped, and if it hadn't been for holding a dagger, she might have been sold to some brothel in Bravos as a slave. As an older sister, she was happy that Daenerys was freer at the moment. They were dragons and dragons flew in the sky in total freedom, not bound by chains. Unfortunately, she didn't know how long they would be chained by fate, unable to fly in the sky. Across town, in the Great Red Temple of Volantis, Kinvara looked at the information on the paper with a helpless expression. How in Enar's name could she find 3 people in the middle of an entire continent? She was beginning to worry that her delay in completing the mission given to her 4 years ago had angered her master. He had sent no message ordering her to find the remnants of House Targaryen, but she had always felt that the sooner she found her god's kin, the more at peace she would be. But after 4 years of searching, she began to worry that the 3 women of House Targaryen had died in an unknown place. If it hadn't been for a rumor that someone had seen the 3 women in Bravos, she really would have believed that the 3 women had died. Getting up, Kinvara headed for the fireplace, which was burning voraciously. She wanted to seek an answer in the flames, just as she did hundreds of years ago, when she saw her city and everyone in it go up in flames. And just like that moment, she saw the flames come to life once again. 3 dragons flying over a city she knew very well, Volantis. Suddenly the flames changed again. One of the dragons was killed by an arrow. The 2 remaining dragons appeared next to the dead dragon, mourning for him. Kinvara awoke from her vision and her face turned pale. One of the Targaryens would die if she didn't do something. She was sure she would be severely punished if such a thing happened so close to her, in the Son of Light's own city. Call Banero. Kinvara spoke towards the door and quick footsteps were heard moving away. 10 minutes later, the door was opened and an old man entered Kinvara's chambers. Banero is a tall, thin man with a gaunt face and skin as white as milk. Tattoos of red flames covered his cheeks, chin and shaved head. He looked quite frightening, which scared the nobles of Volantis, who dared not raise their voices to the high priest. Despite Kinvara's ascension, Banero was the first to support the reforms of 4 years ago. He was the first man to indoctrinate the faithful with the new Bible. A large part of the Red Faith's achievements can be attributed to this man, who contributed enormously in those 4 years. What do you wish, Reverend Mother? Banero's high-pitched voice sounded extremely devout. The Lord of Light has sent me a vision of the future. A dragon will die in Volantis and something like this must never happen. The Child of Light will weep if he hears of the death of his few relatives still alive in the world today. Kinvara got straight to the point, not wanting to delay the rescue of the Son of Light's relatives for even a moment. Banero's face finally changed dramatically when he heard her words. A look of fury burned in the man's red eyes. Someone had dared to murder the Son of Light's relatives in his city. He didn't know how to classify such a blasphemous act. The fiery hand will be mobilized in full force. I want to see which heretic dared to stain our sacred city with the blood of the Son of Light. Banero spoke, his voice transformed into a terrible chill, despite the heat emanating from his body. Flames shot out from his fingertips, forming griffins of living fire. Chapter 27, The Queen and the Exiled Princesses 3. Are you by any chance a fool, friend? Know that I do not associate with fools, they usually die young, usually beheaded. Tyrion Lannister, Hand of the King. 10,000 of the 20,000 men of the Fiery Hand army took to the streets, all marching in order and discipline through the streets of Volantis like a sea of red flames. Their orders were simple. Anyone suspicious was to be interrogated and, if necessary, arrested or executed on the spot. The order was soon raised to a very high level throughout the city. Every foreigner was questioned on the street and searched without discrimination. Man or woman, child or elderly, all were thoroughly searched for any weapon, be it a dagger or even a hand crossbow. In a bar, 3 men were drinking with their heads down, whispering to each other in voices they could only hear. 3 of them seemed to have different ethnies. One was obviously of Dothraki descent, possibly the result of rape, which, believe me, was not uncommon. The second man had white skin, blonde hair and blue eyes, probably the son of Myr. Whether his mother was a prostitute or not, no one could ever know. The third had more closed eyes and a more symmetrical face, black hair and dark brown eyes. His features were completely different from those of the free city dwellers. He was either from the ET Empire or descended from one. What is happening to this damn city? The first man spoke with a strong high Valyrian bastard tone. Never mind, let's finish the mission and leave quickly. I don't want to spend another day in this city full of fanatics. The third man spoke with a slightly worried tone. Let's split up and finish the mission. The second man spoke. He seemed to be the handsomest and most gallant of the 3, with a gentle smile and soft-spoken, the favorite type of ladies in Westeros. The 3 nodded and left one by one, leaving 10 minutes between each exit without raising suspicion. On the other side of the city, in a hotel, Daenerys looked at the streets crowded with red armored guards with obvious admiration in her eyes. A flame of ambition grew deep in her eyes as she watched the mighty army march through the streets of Volantis. If she had such an army, she and her family wouldn't have to run away, would they? She wouldn't have to grow up in a room afraid of anyone suspicious, or be able to eat the delicious food on the street like everyone else. The desire for power in her grew silently, without her even realizing it. "I wonder what happened?" Visenya asked, her eyes looking curiously at the army in the streets. After all, it was one of the most powerful armies today. And from what she'd heard on the way to Volantis, there was a rumor that all the soldiers had been blessed by the Red God, making them immortal. Although she did not believe they were immortal, they were certainly stronger than any regular army. She could tell by the coordination and discipline of each man. As someone who wanted to be like Queen Visenya, wife of Aegon the Conqueror, she wanted to be a general on the battlefield. That's why she studied the arts of war and other related things for more than 10 years. "That is not our problem," Riella replied without curiosity. One thing she had learned was that in order to survive, one must not interfere in other people's affairs. Nothing good comes from getting involved in something you should not be involved in. Visenya rolled her eyes but didn't ask any further, though she was still curious as to what had forced the Red Faith to mobilize its army in the streets of Volantis. In the town square, Banero watched the soldiers coming and going with prisoners and remained indifferent. From the reports he received every few minutes, the number of criminals in the city was dwindling. Thieves and rapists were being executed on the spot. Minor crimes such as stealing food were punished with 5 lashes, followed by a month's imprisonment. He looked to the side and saw the heads of thieves, murderers, and rapists on a wooden cart, a pile taller than a grown man. The smell of blood was so strong on this hot day that it attracted an incredible number of flies and other animals. A man in red clerical garb approached Banero and reported, bowing his head, not daring to look directly into the eyes of the man before him. "Archbishop Banero, there is still no news of the 3 women your excellency ordered." Banero sighed in disappointment, but he wasn't discouraged. It was better that the Son of Light's grandmother and aunts were hidden than that the assassins found them. Making up his mind, he ordered in a calm tone, "Intensify the search. Raid the hotels, pleasure houses, bars, and mansions." The man in the clerical robes was shocked by Banero's order. "Your Excellency, that might cause an uproar among the nobles." Banero remained indifferent. "You will judge whether they are innocent or guilty. If there's nothing suspicious, just leave, but if there are hidden arsenals, the owners of the mansions should be arrested and interrogated." For years ago, the Red Faith's biggest obstacle was the nobles behind the Black Wall, the nobles who equipped enemy soldiers with weapons and armor. Without that, the Red Faith could have controlled the city in less than a month. "May the Lord forgive us our sins." Banero made the sign of the cross and muttered to himself, a gesture the man next to him mimicked. In an alley, Bao looked at the guards patrolling the city and quickly did a parkour, climbing on top of the houses with surprising agility. He skillfully sneaked across the roof, hiding perfectly in the blind spot of the guards below, entering the brothels and mansions. Shouts could be heard in some of these places before silence returned to the streets. It wasn't just on this street, it was all over the city of Volantis, except for the mansions behind the Black Wall, which were being thoroughly searched. Ignoring the screams below, which were quickly silenced, Bao found what he wanted written on the roof of a white house. "Fire Pig Inn, 3rd room on the left from the 2nd floor." Bao's lips curved into a smile and he quickly moved across the rooftops, heading towards the northern part of the city. His footsteps were so quiet that you'd have thought you were standing in front of a street cat, sleek and silent. Jumping the difficult distance to the rooftop of another house, Bao hissed at the burning pain in one of his knees, but after a moment's rest ignored it and continued despite the pain he felt. "I want 40% of the money when I'm done," he muttered to himself, feeling that he was doing more than he was being paid for. After avoiding all the guards on the ground, he finally found himself in front of a building larger than the others. It had 3 floors and was a mid-level inn in Volantis, the high-level ones being the boardiest in the city. Bao entered the inn through one of the open windows and then crept close to the wall, carefully observing his surroundings. He pulled out a dagger, adjusted it in his hand and looked down the corridor for a moment. When he saw that no one was there, he walked away as calmly as if he were a customer of the inn. The dagger was hidden in a blind spot in his hand that could only be seen if someone was behind him. Suddenly, the door to the next room opened, making Bao's body tense, but he still showed a naturalness in his expression. His eyes quickly analyzed who had left the room at such an important moment. He was slightly relieved to see that it was an old man, bent with age, with a gentle expression in his eyes. As the old man walked past him, Bao subtly shifted the dagger in his hand so that it would not be seen by those behind him and moved forward. However, as he took a step forward, the sound of a sword being drawn rang out behind him. Hearing this, Bao lunged forward, but still felt something pass dangerously close to the back of his head. When he turned around, he saw the same old man as before, holding a shorter sword than usual. "How did you find me, old man?" Bao asked, still confused as to how he had been discovered. Chapter 28, The Queen and the Exiled Princesses 4. Sometimes you're just born unlucky. Blame the cruelty of fate, but survive against the odds, though it certainly won't be an easy task. Master of the Order of Assassins. I've been fighting assassins for 10 years, I know how you walk, smell and act, you piece of horse manure. Ser Willem replied as he advanced towards the assassin, brandishing his short sword with a swift strike. He hadn't expected that a brief outing for a drink would uncover an assassin dangerously close to the queen and princess's bedroom. Clang! Willem's sword was blocked by the assassin's dagger with the sound of clashing metal, and the two came to a stop, staring at each other. Under Bao's astonished eyes, Willem simply headbutted him, smashing both of their heads together with one powerful blow. The assassin felt his mind reeling from the impact on his brain and stepped back with a stunned expression. But his instincts, honed by nearly 2 decades of assassination, warned him not to stay in one place, and even with his head dizzy, Bao managed to roll to the side and dodge his enemy's blade. "That was low, you old shit," Bao said, backing away as he glared at the old man, who looked like a solid, hard tree. He had underestimated the old man, he really hadn't expected him to dare to strike such a low and dangerous blow. "An assassin talking about questionable methods, I never thought I'd hear that from someone like you," Ser Willem commented in a sarcastic tone as he moved into attack position. Bao looked at the old man coldly and advanced with the dagger close to his body. He had to kill the old man before anyone was alerted to the fight. Clang! 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 With each exchange of blows, sparks blossomed around them as the cruel sound of steel colliding with steel echoed through the corridor. Bao took a step forward and Willem took a step back. Suddenly it was Bao's turn to retreat and Willem's turn to advance. They were both in this kind of struggle for a long 3 minutes. Suddenly they both stepped back, breathing heavily and staring at each other with cold intensity. Humans had limited stamina and couldn't fight at full strength forever, and it usually didn't take long, as minutes of high intensity was enough to leave any strong human completely exhausted. Bao had the advantage in the fight because he was the youngest, while Willem was exhausted from the 3-minute fight. If it wasn't for the fact that he was holding a shorter, lighter sword instead of a longer, heavier one, he would have lost to such an experienced assassin. Suddenly, as he was concentrating on the enemy, Bao felt a breeze behind him and knew that someone was behind him. He tried to move forward, but still felt a cut in his ribs, spraying a considerable amount of blood into the air. Putting his hand on his chest to stop the bleeding, Bao looked at the person who had attacked him and was surprised to see a young woman with black hair and violet eyes. She held a sword with a firm and excellent posture. He knew that she was one of his targets, but he hadn't expected a princess to actually possess sword skills, and judging from her posture, the princess was no amateur. "Let's fight together, Ser Willem," Visenya said without taking her eyes off the assassin. Willem, as Visenya's fencing instructor, knew the princess' skills well, and they both surrounded the assassin with cold eyes. "There are assassins," a child's voice shouted loudly from outside the inn. Bao, who had a solemn expression on his face, turned terribly pale when he heard the girl's cry. Without hesitation, he turned and tried to run away, but soon found that his path was blocked by the old man he had fought earlier. Looking in the opposite direction, he saw the Targaryen princess, sword in hand, staring at him with coldness and a very real murderous intent in her eyes. He was dead, he knew for sure, especially when he heard the heavy, fast footsteps coming up the stairs. But even if he had a slim chance of surviving, he would do it, because assassins were the people who feared death the most, because they saw death up close every day, and they definitely didn't want to die. Bao made a quick decision. He dropped his dagger and put both hands on his head as he knelt on the floor. Meryn quickly climbed the stairs with a squad of legionnaires, and when he reached the second floor, he soon spotted 3 figures in the corridor. 2 men and a young woman. The legionnaire captain's keen eyes quickly recognized who the murderer was and who the victims of the assassination attempt were. All will be detained for questioning. Drop your weapons and come with us. Meryn spoke in a strong, unquestioning voice, his hand gripping the hilt of his sword, ready to draw if there was any disobedience. As soon as he spoke, Willem and Visenya dropped their weapons and stood still. The door to the room not far away opened and 2 more figures emerged. Riella and Daenerys. Seeing this, Meryn soon realized that this was a group of travelers. Probably grandfather, daughter, and granddaughters. They should all go in for questioning. Don't worry, as long as you have not broken the laws of Volantis, you will be released without any consequences. Meryn told the older woman and man, who nodded. Gesturing to their companions to stay close to the possible perpetrators, they all left the inn in full view of countless people. Riella overcame her uneasy feelings and followed the guards, looking for a way to escape if things got out of hand. If that didn't work, she could reveal her identity and try to get out alive in such a dangerous situation. Or at least give her daughters time to escape safely. The Queen of Westeros held her youngest daughter's hand and walked with her face held high. The deeper the group went into Volantis, the more men in armor appeared before them, and Riella knew she was close to the great red temple of Volantis. Soon the smell of blood reached her nose, and Riella didn't have to wait long to see where it came from. It was hundreds of men's and women's heads piled on a cart. A pool of blood had already formed beneath the cart, and many flies seemed to be feasting on the blood. Daenerys turned pale at such a brutal scene, but the 10-year-old didn't look away, staring at the sight that would make many men and women vomit just to see it. Visenya, like Riella, didn't change her expression much, only feeling more nervous about the unfamiliar surroundings and the uncertain fate that was about to befall her. Meryn, watching the group's expressions, was surprised that the 3 women and the old man did not look away. What surprised him most was the girl, who did not look more than 12 years old though pale. Her eyes were so determined that it surprised him. He had comrades in arms who vomited at such a bloody scene, but here was a girl under 12 looking at it all without any fear. High Priest Banero, this man was caught red-handed trying to kill a family of 4, probably to steal their possessions. Meryn approached Banero and reported in a respectful voice as he bowed to the Red Faith's second-in-command. Banero nodded and spoke, pointing to a man with Dothraki features and one with mere features. 2 other suspects carrying daggers have also been detained. Bao couldn't help but curse inwardly at the sight of his 2 companions. Don't misunderstand, he was not angry that his friends had been caught, he was angry that the information he wanted to sell would probably not be enough to save his life. Making his decision in an instant, Bao spoke out loud, attracting the attention of everyone in the square in front of the great temple. I want to save my life by selling important information. Bao's companions couldn't help but stare at him in disbelief, listening to the betrayal of their fellow member of the Order of Assassins. Banero frowned and looked at the thief with a deep frown. Riella felt her heart begin to beat faster hearing those words. She didn't need to be a genius to know that the killer would sell the information about her and her daughter's true identity to save his own life. Speak, thief. Banero spoke with a cold, powerful voice. These 3 are Queen Riella I Targaryen and her 2 noble daughters, Princesses Visenya and Daenerys Targaryen. Bao spoke quickly without even negotiating the terms of the deal. First of all, he was aware of his situation, and rather than irritate the man before him, it was better to speak directly and pray for his release. However, Banero's words doused the flames of his hope and his face turned pale. You will die. Banero spoke as he stretched out his hand, and flames burst from the tips of his fingers, covering Bao's entire form. Soon, the only sound in the square in front of the great red temple was the painful screams and wails of a man being burned alive. Chapter 29, The Queen and the Exiled Princesses v. When we make mistakes, we know we are imperfect, we must learn from them and never make the same mistake again, becoming more perfect as we grow older. Aenar Targaryen, observing Night's Watch recruits. Daenerys could only hear the cries of agony and mercy from the man who had tried to kill her. She didn't look away, staring directly at the scene. She didn't feel pity, on the contrary, she still felt that he didn't suffer enough, that anyone who threatened her family should suffer the greatest torment for eternity. At the age of 10, she knew that kindness was a beautiful thing, but only fear could make you respected and feared. In this barbaric world, people didn't respect your kindness, they respected your power and only your power. It was a reality she had been forced to face since she was 3 years old, forced to flee like animals. That's why Daenerys didn't feel sorry for the murderer. On the contrary, she watched with a sick pleasure how he suffered. Perhaps it was her way to vent about the constant murders she had suffered in her short young life. Call her cruel and sadistic, but that was what the world wanted. No longer hearing the screams, Banero lowered his hand and looked at the charred body kneeling before him with an indifferent expression. The moment the man had spoken of the identity of the Queen and the aunts of the Son of Light, he had already condemned him to death. No one could harm the relatives of the Messiah. Turning his gaze to the 3 members of House Targaryen, Banero understood why he hadn't been able to find the women before. The dyeing of their hair might make it difficult for anyone to recognize them. Together with the 4th member of the group, it was really difficult to recognize the Queen and the princesses. After all, it was Essos, and a group of 4 was more normal than anything else. Taking a deep breath, Banero approached and spoke with a gentle expression, or at least he felt he was trying to show it. Your Grace, I am Archbishop Banero, and in the name of the Red Faith, Reverend Mother humbly requests an audience with you and your noble daughters. Riella felt a tightness in her chest when she heard the respectful tone. She wasn't happy about it, on the contrary, she was worried. The more respect the man before her showed, the more suspicious she became. Even though she was a queen without a country and exiled to another continent. There was no reason for the Red Faith to show her and her daughters such respect. And I have the choice to refuse? Riella commented with a slightly sad smile, but Banero's next words surprised her. Yes, your Grace can refuse and leave at any time you wish. Volantis will provide you with lodging, a mansion with servants if you wish, and anything else you ask for. Banero spoke in a respectful tone as he bowed slightly forward. As a servant of the Son of Light, he was only sword and shield for the Messiah and nothing more. Banero's words left Riella speechless. How long had it been since she had been treated with such respect and reverence? And she could see that his words were true. Seeing people and trying to guess their intentions was something every king and queen should have, so as not to be so easily deceived. Riella hesitated, Banero's sincerity making her reluctant to leave. It was a chance for her to gain support that would help her granddaughter take the Iron Throne in the future. Though Dorne was powerful with its experienced and deadly warriors, it was far from ready to take on the 6 kingdoms. Her granddaughter needed supporters, and having the Red Faith as a helper would improve her granddaughter's chances of ascending to the Iron Throne. As for what the Faith of the 7 would say, Riella didn't care. During the rebellion, the Faith of the 7 had done nothing to help House Targaryen, and had actually gotten in the way, so why should she care what the Faith of the 7 thought? After hesitating, Riella showed a look of determination and spoke, looking at Banero. I will meet the Reverend Mother. Banero nodded and bowed again as he motioned for Riella, Visenya, Daenerys and Ser Willem to follow. Meryn asked nothing in the face of such an unusual situation, pointing at the 2 remaining assassins and asking, Archbishop, what shall we do with these 2? Banero didn't hesitate to answer in a cold voice, completely different from the one he had used with Riella. If they tell you who ordered the murders, you can give them a quick death, otherwise they'll suffer until the last moment. Visenya looked at her mother and, for the first time in a long time, saw her acting like a real person. Her posture was upright and her face was slightly cold, but noble and elegant. You wouldn't be offended if someone talked to you with such an expression, but rather flattered that such a beautiful woman was wasting her time talking to you. However, she could understand her mother's intentions. Her mother wanted to help her niece, who was hiding in Dorne, gain support from the Red Faith, which unexpectedly seemed very friendly to House Targaryen. Visenya fled King's Landing when she was 7 years old and never again saw such a major power in Essos act so warmly toward House Targaryen. The Red Faith was the first. Of the 3 women, only Daenerys had the least complicated thoughts. She looked at the Red Temple before her and couldn't help but admire the huge building that looked more like a gigantic castle. The temple is an enormous structure of columns, staircases, buttresses, domes, bridges, and towers that flow into each other as if carved out of a colossal rock. The walls of the temple are painted in 100 shades of red, yellow, gold, and orange, so that when the sun's rays hit the temple, it seemed as if the entire temple was bathed in red and gold glory. For some reason, Daenerys felt that something inside the Red Temple was calling to her. It was like an echo in her heart, a pulse coming from the core of her being, a call of fire and blood. She didn't know what it was, but she wanted to run to it and hold it in her arms. But knowing where she was, Daenerys suppressed that feeling with all her willpower and silently followed the man named Banero, who, despite his frightening face full of tattoos, seemed kind and compassionate, even though he had burned a man alive in front of her. Daenerys didn't know how long she'd been walking, but she estimated it to be about 10 minutes when she finally stopped in front of a pair of red wooden doors. The dragon princess saw Banero respectfully knocking on the door, and concluded that whoever was behind it was one of the most powerful women in Essos. And just as Daenerys had imagined, Banero opened the doors to reveal a stunning woman in a red gown. The Reverend Mother of the Red Faith, Kinvara. What caught the attention of Riella, Visenya, and Daenerys, however, was that when the woman saw them, she quickly rose from her chair under the shocked eyes of everyone present. The most powerful woman in Volantis knelt before Riella and greeted her with the utmost reverence and respect. "Welcome to Volantis, your grace, your noble presence graces us with the greatest honor we can have." All the words, respect, and possible terms of negotiation Riella had prepared vanished in an instant before the woman kneeling before her. What's going on? Riella thought, clearly confused by what was happening. Kinvara's actions were no different than a vassal greeting his king on a visit. Seeing the confusion on the faces of the three women and the old knight, Kinvara knew they were confused, but she couldn't appear so important in front of the Son of Light's family. Who knew if one of the three women was the future wife of the Son of Light? How could she make herself look so arrogant in front of her potential queen? Instead of showing an arrogant face, she might as well bond with the three women before everything came to fruition. Seeing the Reverend Mother kneeling, Banero knelt as well, silently waiting for permission to rise. "Thank you for your kind words, you may rise, Archbishop and Reverend Mother." Riella spoke with a strange expression of confusion. When permission was given, Kinvara and Banero rose. "I know your grace is confused about what is going on, but I will explain." Kinvara smiled warmly and spoke in a gentle, warm, but respectful tone. What could Riella say? She just nodded. Then Riella heard Kinvara's next words. "My prince, Aemon Targaryen, ordered me to save you. It took a long time, but finally fate sent me you." Kinvara spoke with a tone full of relief. She no longer had to worry about being punished by Aemon. "Aemon Targaryen?" Riella asked with a surprised expression. She tried to remember if there were any relatives with that name, but apart from Daenerys the Dreamer's father, there was no other Targaryen with a name like that. "I'm sorry, but I don't know any relatives with that name." Riella replied with an even more confused tone after thinking about the name of the boy in question. "Your grace doesn't know him, but you do know his father, after all, he came from your womb." Kinvara replied with a respectful tone as she handed over a letter wrapped in a thin red scarf. Opening the letter, Riella's expression went from confusion to shock and then to complete disbelief. Rhaegar and Lyanna's son? Riella felt her consciousness darken for a moment as she staggered. Fortunately, her daughter held her up while patting her on the back. When she recovered, she felt tears streaming down her cheeks. In addition to her granddaughter, Rhaenys, Rhaegar still had a son in the world, which made her feel relieved and full of joy. She had more living grandchildren. How could she not be happy with the news? Thank the gods. Riella muttered to herself, even though she hadn't prayed to a god in over a decade. When can I meet my grandson? Riella asked with a hopeful tone. Now she just wanted to hug her grandson with all her might. Kinvara shook his head and replied. The Son of Light won't be coming to Essos anytime soon. Riella's mood calmed down when she heard those words. It didn't matter, she would wait as long as it took to meet her grandson and granddaughter again, Aemon and Rhaenys. Chapter 30, Return to Winterfell. Revolution, rebellion, insurrection, riot, subversion, tumult. All words used by others to make other desperate people realize their ambitions. Words every monarch hates, and I'm no different. Aemon Targaryen, God Emperor of Planetos. Westeros North. Jon warmed himself by the fire, roasting a rabbit under the orange flames. His purple eyes fell on the cloaked wooden cage and he smiled. The young dragon was like a curious child, always trying to see what he thought was new. The hatchling had a completely different personality than Carax's. His brother was a voracious warrior and lover of war, as cruel as his face seemed. He loved the smell of blood and the charred corpse of his dragon flames. The young dragon, on the other hand, was playful and eager to explore, full of a free and graceful spirit. Jon liked the hatchling. It would be one of the most important dragons of House Targaryen in the future. Just like Dreamfire, it would be the origin of many dragons. He wasn't afraid to show the dragon to his uncle. On the contrary, he wanted to show it to him and force him to prepare for the coming war. Just as Jon was about to pick up the rabbit and eat it, his movements stopped and he looked south from where he was standing. The sound of horses appeared on the horizon, becoming clearer and more audible until he knew that 4 or 5 horses were approaching. And it wasn't long before 5 horses in different coats appeared before Jon, the crest they wore making him narrow his eyes dangerously. A pink-skinned man. House Bolton of the Dreadfort. Honestly, if it had been Roose Bolton, Jon might have been able to hide his dislike for such a disgusting noble house, but the one before him was anything but honorable. He was a monster in human skin. A man Jon didn't even consider human, but an animal driven by instinct and predation. Standing in front of Jon was an ugly young man, tall and thin with pink and blotchy skin that showed he would be fat at the latest in his life. His lips were plump and looked like worms when he smiled. His eyes were small, narrow, and strangely pale, like 2 shards of dirty ice. Ramsay Snow. What have we here? A handsome boy alone and riding an expensive horse. Ramsay, who rode a red horse named Blood, looked at Jon and commented with a disgusting, ugly smile that would disgust any woman with a normal sense of aesthetics. But the boy's next words made Ramsay's smile disappear completely. The pale, strange eyes narrowed in a dangerous, murderous curve. What do we have here? A bastard pretending to be someone important and his fellow rapists? Jon replied with a smile on his face, looking at Ramsay without hiding the disgust in his eyes. And who is the noble lord in front of me? Ramsay forced a smile which only made him uglier than usual. Jon Snow of Winterfell. Jon spoke, looking at Ramsay with a teasing smile. Ramsay's face tightened visibly for a moment. He looked at the boy and saw his purple eyes and black hair and knew for sure that he was Eddard Stark's bastard. And just as the rumors said, the boy had taken after his mother, Aemon Dane. This made the young bastard's heart burn with envy and jealousy like never before. His mother was a commoner of filthy birth, and he was born ugly and without much talent. His father didn't accept him and despised him, while everyone mocked him behind his back. In comparison, Jon was not only handsome, but also the son of 2 great noble houses. Every lord in the north knew that the Lord of Winterfell loved his bastard, and there were already rumors that Lord Stark would ask the king for a letter of legitimation to legitimize Jon. One was a filthy bastard despised by his father, while the other was a bastard loved by the Lord of the North and would be legitimized in the near future. The difference between them was so great that it made Ramsay's young heart burn with anger, resentment, jealousy, and envy. Will you get out of my face? Your ugly face spoils my appetite. Jon's words made his expression darken even more. Ramsay's aides, known as the Bastard's Boys, glared angrily and whispered to their lord. A cold, bloody smile appeared on Ramsay's lips. You are brave, Snow. Alone in the forest, surrounded by 5 men. Ramsay spoke, his words subtly threatening. I would say that if you were to disappear, no one would be able to find your body. Jon lifted his gaze to look directly into the strangely pale eyes of the Dreadfort bastard and smiled. If you have the courage, tell me directly that you want to kill me. Don't use fancy, pretty words. It doesn't suit you, Ramsay Snow. It makes you sound like a woman trying to seduce a man. The swords came out of their sheaths as soon as they heard Jon's words. I would like to skin you and wear you as a coat to keep me warm in the winter. Ramsay spoke. Jon stood up and pulled Lady Lya from her sheath, the sword coming out with a milky sheen, and when the sun's rays hit the white metal, it practically turned the blade into pure light. Everyone's eyes went to the sword in Jon's hand almost immediately. A shocked look appeared in Ramsay's eyes as he guessed the origin of the material the sword was made of. After all, Dawn was practically one of the 3 most beautiful swords on the continent of Westeros, along with Blackfire and Dark Sister. Ramsay would have been even more shocked if Jon had drawn Dark Sister. I want that sword, Ramsay said with a greedy, envious look in his eyes as Dawn's hilt was remade and the sword was given to the bastard in front of him by his mother, Aemon. Jon's lips curved into a smile of contempt for the man before him and he spoke. Stop talking like a gossiping woman and attack. Jon's words made Ramsay's 4 aides step forward with cruel and sadistic expressions. They were monsters just like their master. Monsters that Jon would show no mercy to. Jon moved into attack position and activated his prescience. This would not be a fight, but a one-sided battle that would undoubtedly be won by him. Dodging the first attack, Jon twisted his body and cut off the head of one of the enemies with a single blow. The sword sliced through bone and flesh like butter. Blood splattered everywhere, but Jon didn't stop, dodging another attack by moving slightly to the side and shoving Lady Lya through the throat of another of Ramsay's men. As he forced the sword out of Ramsay's man's head, half of the man's head dripped out and fell to the ground with a loud thud. Jon wiped the blade clean in one swift motion and spoke calmly with a casualness that sent shivers down the spines of everyone present. 2 down, 3 to go. Ramsay was shocked. He blinked and 2 of his men were killed extremely quickly. But he couldn't say anything as Jon advanced on the 2 remaining men of his guard. Not long after, 2 more heads rolled to the ground as Jon approached Ramsay's horse with a calm, indifferent expression on his face. "Do you think hell exists, Ramsay?" "It exists, but I believe that hell is often our existence on earth," Jon commented, standing 3 meters away from the red horse named Blood. "Get off the horse and kneel before me." Jon spoke again, but this time he used something he rarely used. A skill called voice, capable of controlling others against their will. Under Ramsay's shocked eyes, he found himself dismounting from his horse and falling to his knees before Jon, his pale eyes staring into the purple eyes of the bastard of Winterfell. "I'm not going to kill you, but know that your life will be in my hands. I want you to live knowing that you're only alive because I want you to be, and I can easily change my mind on a whim." Jon said he didn't want to kill Ramsay at this sensitive moment in the north. That's because everyone knows he was at the wall at the same time Ramsay left the Dreadfort. Any idiot could connect the dots and think he was the murderer. Even without evidence to implicate him, he didn't want any trouble with House Bolton right now. At the same time, other northern lords might see the act as rebellion and it could tarnish his reputation, something Jon didn't want under any circumstances. But he still had to do something he wanted to do with Ramsay. Raising his sword under Ramsay's horrified eyes, Jon began to make Ramsay's face even uglier than before. When he was finished, Ramsay's face was full of deep, grotesque scars. "A worthy face for a monster like you, Ramsay Snow," Jon commented, looking at his masterpiece with a satisfied smile. "Every time you close your eyes you'll see me, and I'll be a nightmare until the last days of your life. I hope you're happy with the hell I've prepared for you."